source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation, including the people, process, and technology aspects of change. My name is Eric Kimberling, and this is episode number 67 of the podcast. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. Kyler, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We have a great show for you today. Three main segments as our typical format. And we're going to start off with a few different hot topics and trends in the marketplace. We're going to talk about the acceleration of digital transformation in Ghana, how AI is being used to fight forest fires, collaborative supply chain management with Kraft, Heinz, and Microsoft. So that'll be an interesting discussion to hear how Microsoft is working with some consumer product type companies like Kraft, Heinz. You're going to have a thread for us about how and why digital transformation needs a makeover. And we'll also talk about some biometric imaging for cancerous tumors. So a lot of different applications of different technologies and digital transformation in the first opening segment. And then later in the show, we're going to have Tony Ford on the show, who's a senior manager at Third Stage Consulting. And he's going to be on the show talking about digital strategy and software selection. So how to define your digital strategy, your roadmap, how to evaluate potential technologies. I've got a bunch of questions for him. We're going to take audience questions as well. So we'll have Tony on the show in our second segment. And then last but not least, later in the show, our third guest will be Josh Noble, who is going to be on the show talking about sales technology and creating a culture of change when deploying sales technologies. And salespeople sometimes can be a bit resistant to change, especially when you're interfering potentially with their commissions, or the perception might be that you're interfering with commissions and other revenue generating activities. So that'll be an interesting discussion, both from a technological perspective, but also from a cultural change perspective as well. So that's what we've got in store for you. As a reminder, you can catch new episodes of the show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as all of the audio podcast platforms. And thanks for being here today. So to start, though, we have, before we get to our guest, we have a few hot topics that you've got for us. What are you thinking here, Kyla? What have you got? What are some of these crazy applications of digital transformation that you have in mind here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start from a global scope. So recently, the World Bank provided Ghana 200 million US dollars. That's how much it is in US dollars, to accelerate their transformation, their digital transformation and connectivity. So similar to what we talked about in Rwanda a few weeks back, but basically taking it upon the local government, the public sector, to provide that technology infrastructure. So expanding that digital access and adoption, enhancing digital public services, and promoting digitally enabled innovations within this emerging market. So I think this opens up a really interesting debate, which I wanted your opinion on, Eric. Is technology a fundamental right that should be provided by local governments in the public sector?
Ooh, that's a controversial question there. That's deep.
I want to rip the Band-Aid off today.
We're just going to dive right into the controversial topics here. I don't know if I would say it's a right necessarily, but I do think it's a core component of an economy's infrastructure. So if you think about in Ghana or any other country, for that matter, whether you're developing or an emerging country or a more established country, having access to digital technologies for businesses to be more efficient, better service customers, and have better supply chains, and just increasing standards of living. From that perspective, I think I could see why the government would want to invest in digital transformation. I don't know that I'd go so far as to say it's a right or government should have to do that, but I think it's just a way to develop an economy and to help create that infrastructure for growth in the future.
Yeah, definitely a good answer. I always love to see technology as a service. I think that's really powerful and impactful, especially in these areas that are really emerging into new connectivity. So the one of the biggest objectives of this project is to remove barriers and free up broadband and digital services across Ghana's lowest income people and close that regional digital gap. So I think
Mm,
it's a great way to move the society forward as a whole as opposed to just some more urban areas that are engaging in the current technology infrastructure. So definitely some really cool things happening on that level. Which brings me to my next emerging technology, which is actually out of London. And bear with me while I say this, the American Journal of Neuroradiology. I practiced that just so everyone's aware before we got
you did
on here.
you did better than I would have done with
Yeah,
that.
right? Sounds like I have peanut butter in my mouth or something like that. But basically, this UK-based medical software and services company is called Imaging Biometrics LLC. And what it does is it uses AI technology to distinguish between a progressive tumor and a radiation non-tumor tissue. So basically, instead of having an invasive surgical procedure, this imaging can utilize technology to see if a tumor within a patient is benign or cancerous
Mm.
via different data points that they've put within the AI technology. So, definitely something that is kind of moving towards away from those more invasive procedures in kind of health tech and leveraging different imaging to be able to do that. I think the challenge, and I'm just so interested in your feedback on that, will really be the trust. That's such a vulnerable part about healthcare is it's your body, your life, that type of thing. So I'm curious to see how you think that the human race will embrace that change in leveraging technology, or more importantly, trusting the results.
Well, it reminds me of a TikTok video that you created for the Third Stage TikTok channel, where you were talking about Terminator and AI and kind of tying AI back to the Terminator. And a lot of times, I think that there's along those lines with Terminator, the movie. There's a lot of times a negative connotation with AIs to where it's like a threat to the human race, and
Mhm.
a lot of movies, sort of dystopian movies about AI taking over the world and displacing humans and robots displacing humans. I think there's sort of an underlying fear of the unknown when it comes to new technology like AI. So it's interesting to see a more potential really positive use case
Mhm.
of that technology. Whether or not it works, I have no idea. I haven't tried it. I'm not sure how it works, but I think it could be viewed as invasive, but it also could be life changing for a lot of people too, and it could certainly further science and further the medical field in a way that we haven't been able to do in the past. So I think it's an interesting development for sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we don't realize that the technology in healthcare has constantly been transforming, right? It just went through in the last 2 years a complete 180 when it comes to how people access healthcare and those types of things. But like for example, when I was pregnant with my son, I remember my mom saying like we didn't get ultrasounds back then because we thought they were gonna, like make you have two heads or something like that
Right.
back in the day, when she was having my siblings and I. So I think it's one of those things that it just needs a really clear communication plan around it to be able to appropriately help people understand what it looks like. And a lot of that falls on the providers because that's really where the trust is, right, with the actual doctor. But definitely a really interesting development. And a plug for our TikTok. I triggered some people with AI and Terminator, Sarah Connor. So if you don't follow us on TikTok, we love to engage with our audience on all different platforms. So, you can go ahead and search Third Stage Consulting Group and see some of our more fun videos up there as well. So,
Yeah.
but that kind of brings me to this very interesting partnership between Kraft Heinz and Microsoft. And basically, they've come up with this idea of a collaborative supply chain. And basically, what it does is it uses the Microsoft platform Azure, or I think Azure is how we say it.
Azure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've heard it both ways, but Azure usually is the more mainstream way, to create, more predictive analytics and improve inventory transparency, anticipate customer demand, and that type of thing. So, basically what it's doing is it's taking some of the biggest supply chains and inventory-based businesses and opening up their data to share across other organizations so that they can utilize different data points to try and forecast any issue in demand. So they call this program the supply chain control tower. They kind of they do a little like third stage. I think they stole our branding because they know how cool we are. Um,
I was just going to say that. They
absolutely.
totally must have stolen that.
Yeah, so they talk about it as an traffic control across the company's full product portfolio, and visibility into that real time supply chain data to be able to get customers the goods that they need.
Hmm.
So I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on this concept of collaborative supply chain. A lot of times we know supply chain can be sort of a competitive advantage for businesses. So to see some of these giants in the industry to kind of open up to working with other businesses as far as supply chain needs. I'm interested to hear if you think that's going to be a trend that we see within kind of the business landscape globally.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it could. I mean, I think supply chains are so massive and complex, a lot like utilities and energy companies
Mhm.
or construction companies where you're dealing with disparate inventory and operations and crews and time tracking and project costing and things of that nature. There's just a lot of complexities in the supply chain similar to some of those other industries. So I think rather than trying to recreate the wheel on a case by case basis, creating a more open ecosystem around supply chain collaboration, I think could work to the advantage of business in general, supply chains in
Mhm.
general. But to your point, whether or not that sort of neutralizes or waters down any sort of competitive advantage you might have had, um, I suppose you're not gonna, if you have a highly functioning, highly effective supply chain and you're really good at it, I suppose you're probably not going to be a good candidate for the sort of collaborative supply chain. Maybe not necessarily. But if you're looking to improve your supply chain and collaborating with other companies, I think that can make total sense. It's sort of like taking that open source or networking effect to another level. Instead of just like open source opens up their technology
Mhm.
to other third-party developers and things of that nature. This is sort of the same concept, but within a supply chain setting, just really opening up the supply chain to, get the collective wisdom of crowds versus relying on, just one organization to figure it out. So I think it could be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's certainly an interesting concept. I mean, it gives so much more data to be able to make accurate and impactful forecasting.
Mm.
Another thing that they're working on is creating this concept of manufacturing facilities digital twins. And I've seen the term digital twins all over, and I actually really never knew what it really meant until this this press release that I was looking into, but basically they kind of copy and paste, if you will, the plant floor after testing one area or one manufacturing plant to be the most efficient. They move it directly as it is. And
Mm.
something that I wanted to ask you about that concept of Azure's digital twins is there a people component to that? Like basically, you're moving the processes and efficiencies and technologies right over to a new manufacturing plant, but you also have a brand new workforce or an existing workforce, but with new policies. So I wanted to just ask you, what is the human component of a digital twin manufacturing plant?
Well, it's a lot like, in my opinion, it's a lot like the organizational impact of a SaaS, multi-tenant cloud solution where there's essentially hundreds or thousands of organizations using the same type of software configured for the most part the same way. Now, I'm oversimplifying because SaaS software can be configured and set up differently company by company, but in general, the workflows and the way the software works is very consistent across customers, whereas older on-premise systems you could tailor and customize it. The reason I bring this up is because it's the same sort of culture shock a lot of times when you try to impose a SaaS solution or even a cloud-based solution into an existing organization with existing operations,
Mhm.
because it's just such a shock to the system in many ways. And I think that's the case with digital twin too. Is you might have the perfect model in terms of efficiency and process flows and the technologies to support it, but if it's at all different, for better or for worse, than what the current operational state is, you can't just sort of throw it in there and expect people to adapt to it. So change management is even more important in those sort of
Mhm.
settings where you have an optimized process or set of processes and technologies. You need to make sure that the people side of the equation is heavily invested in, because it is going to be harder to change. Even if it's a better model, that doesn't matter
Mhm.
to people that are resisting change. It's a fact that it's different, and people fear that change.
Absolutely. Well, that's a fascinating partnership, and we'll definitely keep our audience updated on what that looks like. The supply chain control tower, which I might steal, but now that Kraft Heinz has it, it's probably copyrighted all over everywhere. So maybe I
Right.
won't. But so then the next topic I wanted to kind of discuss is I started very, very globally, and now I'm going to do a hyper local focus, which we don't typically do because of our global audience. But I thought this was a really interesting technology, and this is actually in Eric and our headquarters backyard here in Colorado, and talking about using AI. Here they're piloting with Lockheed Martin, which obviously is a huge aerospace and defense company here out of Denver, and using AI to be able to map fire areas in 15 minutes versus the hours that it used to take,
Hmm.
utilizing technology. And they call this concept actionable insights. So it's not going to stop the fires, right? But it's going to arm all of the different agencies and fire control professionals with the data that they need to be able to most efficiently and strategically fight wildfires. And here in the United States, we've had a pretty significantly destructive wildfire last couple of years, not just here in Colorado where we live in the United States, but also in areas like California, and things like that. So I wanted to kind of talk about the idea of these actionable intelligence insights, and specifically in looking at things like natural disasters, Eric, and thinking about how we might utilize those types of things to either troubleshoot those natural disasters or be able to avoid them altogether. And I'm wondering if you think that might be kind of an emergent trend when it comes to, battling Mother Nature for these types of different areas.
Yeah, it's sort of like your thread on the imaging for
Mhm.
cancer and tumors. I think it's one of those fields, forest fires and science in general is one of those fields where there's so much data being captured or available for analysis and decision making, or making use of, that I think that is an example where AI could be a really good application, because you're taking mass amounts of volume presumably regarding weather and overall climate and the conditions of whatever geographic area you're trying to pinpoint, and using AI and past data and predictive analytics and things of that nature to figure out and anticipate what is likely to happen. So I think it's a perfect use case for how, what the power of AI is, and really harnessing the use of data, both internal sources and external sources that they might be drawing from. I have no idea, what
Mhm.
data sets the AI algorithm is drawing from, but I presume there's a lot of different diverse data sets that it could be pulling from. And so it's just a good way, it's a good way to look at how AI could potentially do things that the human brain or the human, limitations of the human mind may not be able to address.
Absolutely. And they're working, Lockheed Martin is working with a software company, and I believe it's pronounced Navita, out of California. And
Hmm.
basically, they produce a digital simulation of the wildfire based on topography, the conditions of vegetation, wind, weather, to help forecast how it will burn. So that's just an idea
Yeah.
of some of the data points they are utilizing, to make sure at least they can look at what the fire is likely to do and forecast that, just to keep people and homes safe.
Yeah, and then if you add machine learning, take the machine learning subset of AI and have the AI algorithm continuously learn, as more data is captured and as more fires happen, and it kind of learns and fine tunes the AI component of it through machine learning. So I think that's super interesting. I'd be curious to see how that unfolds over the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. And they talk about the Forest Service integration on that, and I thought it was interesting because Lockheed Martin is kind of covering the process and technology, but the Forest Service still targets the people side. So I just want everyone to know that Smokey the Bear is still very much relevant when it comes to how these fires actually start, right? As opposed to being able to mitigate that risk and just educating the general public when it comes to the fire danger in the local area. So, definitely an interesting kind of partnership there.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. And so, lastly, kind of a fun article that I wanted to end on today. So, this is an interesting opinion piece about how the word and term digital transformation needs a makeover. And they actually polled a lot of CIOs, CFOs, C suites on what they would rename digital technology or digital transformation, excuse me, to make it more relevant and less of a buzzword. So, I want to share some with you to see what your thoughts are, and then we'll get you to help us rename it. So, a CEO of the Noble Foundry said that he would rename it "Customer First," is what he would rename digital transformation. And then the chief information officer and chief digital officer at Dow would name it the digital Dow, which is not really, that's kind of um, showcases the brand there. And then we have a chief architect leader from Red Hat would name it digital leadership. And then
Hmm.
lastly, from Vanguard, actually, he's a retired CIO. He would name it New Ways of Working and even has an acronym for it, NWOW. So very
And
interesting.
and wow.
Yeah, right. And wow, that's way better. Yeah. So, so knowing that a lot of times the industry feels like digital transformation is too much of a broad term, which really in reality it should be, right? Because it has a lot of different meanings. But if you had to make over the term digital transformation, what would you name it?
Hmm. Well, I wouldn't name it customer first, and I definitely would not name it digital DAO. I think those are two, myopic. Digital DAO obviously is focused on their brand, which is
Yeah.
catchy from their perspective, but not necessarily something that would apply to everyone. Same with customer first. It's not necessarily the priority of every digital transformation to put the customer first. You could argue maybe they should be,
Hmm.
but some organizations do perfectly fine with their customers, and it's more about increasing efficiency or optimizing inventory levels or uh, optimizing costs or whatever. There's different priorities for different companies. So I don't think you can generalize in that regard. I guess of the ones you mentioned, I like the last one the best, the new ways of working, because that essentially is what it is. And I think that applies to most, if not all, organizations going through digital transformation. So, um, how I'm not a big buzzword person. So asking me to create a buzzword, I'm probably the last person you want to ask because it would be super stale and uncreative and probably even worse than what we already have. So I feel like there's too many cooks in the kitchen on the whole buzzword thing. We'll let the
Yeah.
industry analysts do that part, and we'll just sort of
Hmm.
we'll focus on helping clients execute it. So
There you go. Well
how's
said.
that for a
Well,
non-answer?
that's great. I think it was very, very well put. So yeah, I think there is something to be said about that buzzword in general. I wish there was a better way to say like the people process technology. It's almost like it brought me because of course I was like, well, what would you name it? And like the circle of life. Like I was going like Lion King on it. Everybody. So I think I
Not
went
bad.
a little too down the rabbit hole
And you're
with
thinking
that.
you're thinking really big picture,
I
like high
really
level.
am. So, but if you do have any names, we'd love to hear them in the comments. We do read every one of the comments that come through on any platform that this podcast is broadcasting. So we'd love to hear from you if you do have thoughts on it, or you can tag either one of us on Twitter at Kyler Cheatham or Eric Kimberling and tweet us, and we'd love to talk to you about it. So with that,
Yeah.
though. Oh, do you want to say another
No,
plug for your?
no, no. I was saying that's a good point. You can tweet us, you can TikTok,
Yeah,
duet or stitch us or something,
yeah,
whatever the
yeah.
kids are doing these days on TikTok.
We're stitching it. Yeah, absolutely. So we always love to do that and interact with our audience on different levels. And I think that's the fun part about the Third Stage brand is it's much more approachable and just more fun to be able to engage with technology that has sometimes been labeled as a stale subject, but it really is evolving and fun and it's really artistic as well. So it's something we like to create with our community. But with
Yeah.
that, you had a very, very detailed conversation with Tony Ford, one of our senior consultants here, and we could probably spend about a couple hours unpacking all of the things that was said. So I definitely recommend listening to this one twice if you can, because there was so much good information in that talk today.
Yeah, yeah, and that conversation with Tony Ford, we delved, delved, dove
We delved,
into the
we delved it in
del,
there.
delved and doved into the misuse of the English language, as well as as well as digital strategy. So we really honed in on digital strategy, software selection. What are some of the things you should be doing up front, even before you start implementing technologies? And it covered a lot of different grounds on that discussion. A lot we didn't cover, but it covered as much as we can in an hour. So we're going to bring Tony on the show here after a quick break, and we're going to talk about digital strategy and software selection. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control, and we'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 67. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as all the audio podcast platforms out there, Spotify, Pandora, Google, Amazon, etc. So be sure to check us out and subscribe to the weekly show, new episodes every Wednesday. And the second segment we have, or the next guest we have on the show here, is Tony Ford, who's a senior manager at Third Stage Consulting. We wanted to have him on the podcast to talk about digital strategy, software selection, what some of the best practices are, some of the lessons from some of the clients we're working with right now, some of the lessons from even earlier in his career, and certainly take audience questions as well. So all that being said, Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to some of the questions that we're going to get from the audience. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess just to start here before we get to some of the audience questions, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background leading up to joining Third Stage, and also tell us what you do at Third Stage.
Okay. Well, I've been in the industry for a long, long time. Been in management consulting for a significant part of my career. I've worked with some of the well-known large integrators in the industry. Some of them names you'll recognize. So we won't share those names, but spent a lot of time in the business. I spent a lot of time with one of the large software vendors as well, executive at one of those companies. But I've got a lot of experience. I've worn a lot of hats. I've worn the large program management, project management hats. I've been a solution architect, primarily focused around the ERP world. I've got a lot of experience in data architecture as well. I actually ran a data administration function for a large pharmaceutical in my career. So I've got a pretty good, well-rounded wealth of experience, both breadth and depth in a number of areas. So when it comes to digital strategies and digital transformations, we can certainly talk and from a lot of perspectives.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you've got that architecture perspective, the program management perspective, a lot of different hats that you've worn on these projects. What is it you do out here at Third Stage?
Well, I'm a digital transformation strategy consultant for Third Stage. So when there are opportunities to engage us to help corporations chart a course where they are trying to make some changes in their business, and then, of course, to deploy a technology or set of technology strategies around that. That's where we get engaged to help them with that. Then also to help them with, once we chart the course, to make some solutions along the process.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And so you've had some good exposure throughout your career to all different types of industries. And actually, we were just talking before we went live here about your family that it has been in a number of different businesses as well. So you've got to see kind of an entrepreneurial spirit within your upbringing. So
Yep.
At a young age, I imagine you started seeing maybe not digital transformation per se, but just seeing how businesses operate at an early point in life.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good deal. So I guess to start, if we just back up and just start at the 20,000 foot view, why is it so important for organizations to have a clearly defined digital strategy and roadmap?
Well, there's a lot of change going on in various industries, and companies are growing. You really need to start thinking about, rather than, well, I've got a problem for today. A lot of times what happens is we have a problem for today. We start focusing on a very specific and targeted problem, and you start to fix one problem, then you cause another. So having a digital strategy really takes a more of a holistic view of things, both horizontally and vertically. And we're going to talk about that maybe later, but so that as you're trying to develop a strategy, you're examining why you're going to go in a certain direction. And that is usually centered around deriving certain values in the process, and also trying to fix certain pain points, strategic pain points that are causing the organization a lot of problems and inhibiting the organization from achieving whatever strategies or goals that they have to achieve. So the whole idea is to take more of a holistic approach and try to make sure that all the components, and by the way, it's not just a technology component, right? But it's a lot of components in trying to make sure all those components fit, both for the short term and the long term as you go through the cycle of looking at your technology transformation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you started to touch on this question, but when you talk about the components of a digital strategy, you said it's not just the technical pieces, but there's other components to an effective digital strategy. What are some of those other components, or some of the key things that people should be thinking about as they define their digital strategies?
I think probably to start with, right, is just to make sure that you have a really good understanding of where your business is trying to go. And because that really becomes the compass, if you will, for defining what technologies and what strategies that you want to deploy. Then, of course, as you're going through the process, it becomes the point of coming back to make sure and confirm that you're still on target. Because sometimes as we're going through a transformation, we may drift one way or the other, depending on the challenges of the day that might focus us to go down one path. But what happens is, if we begin to understand what the business drivers are, they tend to keep you on target, right? So that's probably one. The second part of that is to make sure that those strategies are in alignment with whatever the technologies are, the strategies are, and the roadmap that you're building. So that, again, it becomes, once you've got that alignment of business to solution to strategy to roadmap, you can always now begin to come back and use it as a way of making sure you're staying on course. So that's one. But certainly understanding your overall vision for where you want to go. Often when we get into some of the executive workshops, one of the first questions we're asking is describe what your transformed organization is going to look like. And sometimes companies have a real clear vision of what that is. They actually have a stated vision statement, right? And sometimes they don't. So what we usually do is we say, well, can you describe, if you had to describe the attributes of where you trying to go, what does that look like, right? So we try to do that. We also try to identify strategically what are the major goals of the organization. Another component. We also try to make sure that we understand what the strategic requirements are, the strategic challenges. I interchange those terms because a lot of times, we talk about the challenges, but those become the requirements. And when I say strategic, and I'm going to use an example, we had one client that was fairly large in size, had over 70 divisions. And so with 70 divisions with four major business units. And so the challenge for them was trying to consolidate that into one perspective, or one centralized set of strategies. And so what we did there was clearly define, well, what is a strategic requirement? This is probably more of the common requirements to all of the divisions that they could all agree on were very important. Obviously, there's more than just that set of requirements, but those were the ones they decided were strategic to all of the business units, right? Certainly understanding the improvement opportunities, the challenges, strategic challenges, prioritization, really important around strategy, because those tend to direct, once you start to feel for where your programs, the strategic programs are, where the priorities are, where do I start? Because a lot of times we don't know where we start, where the value is. You may find that there's some projects that are strategic, but they're low hanging in that the cost is low, but there's a real opportunity to create value. So understanding what those priorities are very important as well, because they'll drive the transformation program. So those are some of the really, of course, identifying and understanding what your strategic risks are through the transformation. As you're going through the process, right? Making sure you understand, well, there's some risk associated with that as well. And then lastly, I think having a real strategic understanding of organizational change. We find that organizational change is probably a really, really important part of the process. So that's a component that we really focus on during the process.
Yeah. You talked about risk, which is interesting in the context of digital strategy. What are some examples of risks that organizations should be thinking about, or some examples of common risks that organizations identify at this point in the cycle when they're first defining their overall strategy and roadmap?
I think one of the biggest risks is just making sure that you understand requirements and how they'll line up to your business. This is one that is really undervalued, I think, in some of our clients that we go to. A lot of times what we find is we want to go from the startup of this process and go right quick to software selection. And so one of the pitfalls is the digital transformation. Sometimes when you look at a software selection, it's kind of packaged, viewed as one process, and it's really not one process. They're separate, and they have separate objectives. And the software selection is more of an output of the digital transformation. So probably one risk area is assuming that the digital transformation and the strategies that come out of that somehow are a part of the software selection. They're really not. And so there's separating and not making that gray and creating that and making that one part as part of the software is really important. Because then what you start to do is you start to look at this as a business exercise rather than a software selection first. So I find that happens more often than you would think. Even with some of the larger corporations that we work with, the need to do your due diligence up front, and I think that's important, because what happens is it it does help the process downstream when you put the time in up front to make sure that you understand the business and how it aligns to a specific technology strategy that you're developing. So that's a really, really big one. And I think probably the second one right after that is really underestimating organizational change and the impact that it may have. Obviously, if you're doing a really whole scale change of technologies or applications to support your business, it's going to affect your organization, not just from the standpoint of the organization and potentially resistance to the change, but also operationally, where you're going to have to change how you're doing things in your business that will cause a lot of discomfort, a lot of need for programs to help with the change process.
Gotcha.
So those are probably some of the ones that really we're seeing that cause some of the biggest problems in the process of digital transformation.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Yeah, that's a good overview. And I want to turn to the audience real quick and just highlight some of the where some of the people are joining from here today. We have Cam on YouTube from San Diego. Anurada from Toronto, who's on LinkedIn as well. We have Third Stage joining from Denver, Colorado. Sheena from on LinkedIn from California. Thanks for being here today, Sheena. Parisa from Denver. We have Edwin from Dallas, Texas, as well as Prabhakar from Bangalore as well. So thanks to everyone for joining here today, and those of you that have shared where you're from here today. I really appreciate you joining here today. And then also we have David from Ireland too. That's another person that's joined here from Ireland on LinkedIn as well. So thanks for joining from different parts of the world here today. And of course, if you have questions, please chime in at any point. We're talking about digital strategy. We're going to get into software selection here in just a moment. But actually, while we're on that topic, I'll kind of want to go a little bit deeper into that point you made about how digital strategy, software selection are not the same thing. Sometimes companies just jump right into the software selection. Sometimes they sort of back up and define that digital strategy. Maybe just help us unpack that a little bit more. How are those two things really different? Why are they not the same thing? And why is it important to sort of view those as distinct phases of a digital transformation?
Okay. If we talk about it just from a process standpoint, when you're going through a digital transformation strategy, you're really looking at my audience that I'm having a conversation with is different. I'm going to be talking to the executive team within an organization. We are now taking a longer term perspective of the organization. So we really, really want to understand strategically speaking, where they're trying to go with the company, what they believe are the challenges to get there, what they believe are the potential solutions to what they see as strategic challenges or problems that they're having in the organization. And so the audience is different. You're taking a longer term perspective. It is a holistic, because now we're looking at the entire enterprise, and we're looking at all of the challenges. So we're not diving into one specific operational area. So that's a real big part of that, right? And then we are building a series of programs that are prioritized into an overall roadmap. So right off the bat, you're seeing it's a longer term, it's more holistic, it's more an executive perspective, it's business driven. And so those are the key aspects, as opposed to the software selection now where, we're now moving a little bit closer to the operation. It's a little bit more targeted potentially. And we're actually doing functional deeper dives to understand specifically what are some of the challenges specifically in certain areas. We may have a strategic challenge around a specific aspect of supply chain. But now I'm going to say, okay, operationally, am I having some problems in my procurement? Am I having some problems warehousing and logistics and shipping? Am I having some problems in my production management cycle? So we're digging down deeper operationally. We're trying to identify what some of the pain is more specifically. We're also trying to target now operational KPIs that are, by the way, are linked back to strategic goals. So one of the things that we're trying to do, I have a wheel that I call the business solution wheel, where we start with the vision and we work on the wheel. Well, one of the points on the wheel is operational objectives, and we want to make sure that they are tied back to specific strategies and goals, so that we'll keep continuing this linkage. Because the whole idea is, at some point when I create a project charter, right, I want to be able to go, I've got a KPI, which is an improvement KPI, that becomes an ROI back to the project, and I can tie that all the way back. So we're trying to make sure we do. So operationally, we're just digging down deeper, and it's more targeted and focused on a specific application or functional area, potentially, with more details.
Yeah. And I can see how, if you just jump to that step in the process of just starting to evaluate technology, then it could get pretty overwhelming pretty quickly in terms of determining, well, what kind of technology do I look at? Even in your example, supply chain, you've got supply chain management, standalone solutions, you've got standalone warehouse management solutions, procurement solutions, logistics solutions, you've got enterprise-wide ERP systems that can do all that stuff. So if you look at all those different buckets, I mean, you could be caught up in analysis paralysis for a long time, just trying to figure out, what technologies are out there. So that's the first, as you were talking, that struck me as well.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that we see, specifically, when I'm going to back up, when we go back to the digital strategy, is you consistently hear that I don't have visibility across the organization. I'm almost every time I walk in the door, some of the biggest challenges that we hear about strategically around business integration. Let's not talk about technology. It's just a business integration where I'm taking an order on the front end, and as a salesperson, I want to know the status of that order, but I can't see, because I can't see in the production cycle if I'm producing something out of the process. I can't see where it's at. I can't see logistically in a warehouse and shipping where's my customer's order. I can't see. And if I've got holes on orders, if I got holes, why is there a hole? So you see this whole, and then also in the approval cycle, right? You see the automation of approvals and integration across multiple organizations within the process cycle. I can't see the visibility of things. That's a really big one. So again, the holistic approach that you get out of the enterprise takes that perspective, and usually the issues with a digital strategy are those points of integration where I'm handing off information, or I'm acquiring information from one department or one organization to the next. Those are the places where you tend to see some of the biggest challenges in the organizations.
Interesting. Yeah. We're here at Tony Ford talking about digital strategy and software selection. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll return with more of the conversation. In the meantime, you're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 67. We're here at Tony Ford talking about digital strategy and software selection. And then it's sort of a related question from the audience here. This is from Kyler on LinkedIn. How do you achieve executive alignment regarding viewing a selection as a holistic business decision rather than just an IT project? So how do you get executives on board with the fact that this is not just, to your point earlier, this is not just a technical decision or a technology evaluation? How do you get that alignment internally, or have you seen that dynamic? had to overcome before?
Yeah. Well, and we've seen that. I've seen that type of resistance, right? Even at the executive level, right? Because again, there's a tendency to want to jump right to the software selection. That's a big challenge that we have when we go through these workshops and this digital strategy process. It starts first off with the executive workshops, making sure that we understand the business and the value, and very quickly demonstrating the linkage. And I say that it's important to make sure as quickly as you can to make sure that the executives can see the alignment and the value that a technology may produce out of the process. So that's one. And as the second thing is, as we're going through the process of identifying all the components, to continuously demonstrate the alignment and how, if I've got a strategic requirement or a challenge, how is that impacting or inhibiting a goal that I'm trying to achieve? So you got to make sure that we're continually aligning and continuing. If you're doing all these, if you're compartmentalizing everything and creating silos of information, and you're not linking that back, even at the strategic level, you're going to lose your audience pretty fast, and they won't see the value. But once you're linking it and creating that linkage and alignment, and even to the point where you start at the operational level, tying specific business process back to a strategic goal, and immediately they go, oh, well, so for me to achieve this strategic goal, I've got a business process supporting it, but it's being inhibited by a pain point that's causing us not to be able to perform in a manner that's helping me achieve my goal. If they can see that linkage, then it really helps the process of bringing the executive team over to the point of realizing the value in the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I could see organizations in today's day and age, especially with the world that we're in, where a lot of software vendors are sort of migrating their solutions, their old on-premise solutions, to the cloud. And now they're sunsetting their older solutions, like Microsoft's doing it. They're sunsetting Great Plains and kind of forcing you onto D365, or SAP's doing it with R3 and ECC, forcing you onto S4HANA. And they're all doing it. I don't mean to pick on just SAP or Microsoft. They're all sort of following a similar path to sort of pushing their customers over to the newer systems. It seems like a lot of organizations, as a result of that, are sort of bypassing this whole digital strategy thing, because it's sort of like what you're talking about is the big picture, long-term view. And a lot of them are getting down in the nooks and crannies of, well, I've got to replace my old Microsoft or SAP or ERP system now. So that's my digital strategy. I'm going to replace my legacy system. Do you see that dynamic a lot more nowadays than we saw 10 years ago? I do. And the mistake that some of the organizations are making is, again, focusing on one problem and one solution. And it's kind of like, the more technologies that you have in your portfolio, the greater the chance you're going to break something by introducing something new. So it becomes very important now, if I've got a large organization, and I'm not just saying for a large organization, but if I've got a portfolio of digital solutions that are supporting my business, and I focus on one, you really potentially could break something, right? It's kind of like if I'm doing an upgrade, right? If I'm on an ERP system on an upgrade cycle, right? If you introduce a custom solution, this is the whole point of the cloud, right? Which is to try to eliminate or limit my impact to anything that I've built on that I've custom built. The more chances that you build something custom, more opportunities that you introduce something into the software solution that's going to break something later. So same kind of principle applies here, right? I was going to come back to something that you were focusing on too, and I'm going to come back to it. One of the other areas that we find in the digital strategy transformation that companies are overlooking a little bit more than you would think is not just looking at your company digitally, horizontally, and functionally, but looking at the technology stack. Just recently had a client that they did an excellent job of building their digital strategy long-term. And by the way, they had a lot of divisions, very large portfolio of technologies. So when you saw the picture, it looked like a jigsaw puzzle when I first looked at the picture.
and did an excellent job of looking at the software layer of the technology stack. So at the top, I've got software, then data, then infrastructure. They did an excellent job of a strategy across the top two layers of their technology stack. But they did identify an infrastructure strategy, but they had not done a real examination of their solutions when they started to go down that path of doing a software selection. And what we found was they really overlooked the infrastructure layer, which, by the way, became a very important part of their strategy since they had so many components and they had a longer journey, maybe a 5-year journey, to transform the organization. So you wanted to make sure that you've got a sound foundation to build on from an infrastructure standpoint. If you got to constantly be moving a lot of pieces. So I think one of the areas that, from a digital strategy, the risk area, if you will, is that a lot of corporations need to pay a little bit more attention to their infrastructure and the tools that come along with the migration in and out of the cloud, the migration tools and the support of how you migrate in. All these components become very important as part of that strategy. And that there's some oversight in doing that. And there's also a sense of moving to the cloud is a lot easier than you think. And so I think there's some underestimation of going from on-premise solution to a cloud solution, that somehow we're going to flip a switch and there's going to be some nice integration. I mean, my migration tools will get me there pretty quickly. And we underestimate that process.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's a good way to really think outside the box of just a application. You know, even if you were just implementing an application and moving it to the cloud, there's a lot more to it, you know, as far as data, the integration points, the overall architecture, obviously all the process changes, the change management strategy that you talked about. I mean, that's just a lot of stuff. And you know, what I think is really interesting that you're talking about here is that in most cases, I would say, and tell me if you agree or disagree with this, but it seems like in most cases, it's not, even if a client thinks it's going to be one system, it's going to be one ERP system, a core ERP system that does everything. It's usually not. Usually you've got other stuff you've got to tie into and integrate with, or, you know, you end up in a best of breed scenario, even though you don't really want to, because you need different capabilities that the core system doesn't have. Is that something you found, or what are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. There's never, you know, even when you lock down on a single ERP solution that you think it's well, let's face it, it's never 100% fit, right?
Right.
So there's always an opportunity for third-party components. There's always a opportunity for some custom solutions. There's always an opportunity for even some of the software vendors who are using third parties to build components that are branded to their own solution. There's always potential there for those types of scenarios where you've got to have hooks into different components. So, you know, integration of the different pieces and ensuring that you've got platforms that enable the ease of integration or easier integration, right? Becomes very important. So again, it comes back to taking more of a broad look and recognizing that a digital strategy, one of the outcomes of a digital strategy is the blueprint. And the blueprint is really just to help you define the characteristic of what your technology should look like. And so now you have a specification for a technology, an ERP technology, but it's not defining that specific solution. It's saying, here's what the model, here's what your technology should look like. Here are the capabilities it should have. And now that becomes a measuring tool. Again, when you go to look at your actual software selection, you have something to go back to and measure against, because you have built a blueprint of what that solution to look like to enable your business to achieve what it needs to achieve.
Yeah, it's a good point. And this question from the audience here from Prabhakar, I hope I pronounced that right, from Prabhakar on LinkedIn, asks the question of share your thoughts on this comment. The change in technology after we start our digital transformation with the technology, and the expectation from the leadership to align our existing program with this new technology. I think what he's saying is, you know, what are your thoughts of that common dynamic where an executive says that our digital strategy is to implement this technology and we're going to line everything around the program and everything we do around that technology. I think what he's getting at is what you were talking about earlier, which is what you don't want to do, or at least that's my perception. If I misunderstood the question, please, correct me. But what are your thoughts there on do you see that dynamic, and how do you overcome that dynamic of, hey, our digital strategies and implement this technology, or we're going to focus just on deploying that technology and doing everything we need to do?
Okay. I think there's two ways to approach that dynamic, right? One is when you build your digital strategy, it does become, I'm going to use that word compass again. It's the compass that allows you to come back and litmus test that if I'm taking a specific digital strategy or and let's say I'm midstream, I've got my roadmap, and I'm actually maybe in phase 2, right, of my roadmap. And I obviously, if you've got a longer journey, you've got a longer road path, there's always potential that somewhere your market's going to change. And part of the solution for building a digital strategy is to build for change. That has to be one of the objectives of a digital strategy, is to make sure that I've got a blueprint that creates flexibility and ability to scale as my markets and my industry changes. So that's one thing that's going to aid in the process downstream, is that I've anticipated change, and I'm building my digital solutions around flexibility to change with my industry and so forth. That's one. Second one is, since you've built a digital strategy, is you've got blueprint and you've got a roadmap, you now again have this tool that you're using that continuously gives you a place to go back and check and make sure. And even if you're in the IT world and you start to see maybe we're drifting away, you have a way to come back to the executive team that says, again, we have a solution that's aligned to specific values. Are we moving away from that? Or if our business values have changed, is our technology still aligned? So you have a constant way of going back to you and checking off whether my strategy is still sound, whether if my business has changed or whether the technology changes, is everything still sound? So you've got to go measure against.
Yeah.
Maybe hoping that's answering the question. I think the main thing is to make sure that you have, and the other thing too is to continuously evaluate against it, right? We build a digital strategy and we just say, okay, that's it. We're not, it's never going to change, but that's not going to happen because it is going to change. So you have to constantly come back to it and use it as a tool that it is, and evaluate, maybe year to year or what have you, project to project, am I staying course? And to challenge that strategy to make sure that what we're doing is still in line with what we were trying to achieve in the beginning.
Right. Yeah, that's sound advice, and a good way to sort of get outside the myopic view of just deploying technology as well. Here's a comment, but I'm actually going to turn this into a question. And this is from Ghassan on LinkedIn. He says, I've yet to see a tool that will help simulate a cloud migration project whereby you input all your existing on-premise solutions along with integration points, and the tool will provide you with an estimated cost along with the timeline. Let me finish the question here that it led off the screen here. Along with the timeline, providing offerings from various infrastructures as a service providers. So Ghassan's sort of thinking ahead here to we have the technology to do it, I suppose, with artificial intelligence, machine learning, ways that you could put inputs to sort of predict how long a project is going to take. So he's making the comment that tool doesn't seem to exist as far as some sort of automated tool where you just plug in what technologies you have now, what you're going to, and what your integration points are, and it's going to spit out some sort of estimate. Why do you think that doesn't exist yet? If only were that easy.
Yeah. Well, no, he's probably right. It doesn't exist. There's just so many different components. There's so many factors that influence. Often, I'm going to say this too, often with third stage, we produce a lot of materials and opinions. And a lot of times, we have clients that want to take our opinions and apply them to all circumstances. And of course, they don't apply to all circumstances. They're like any other study or case, like that any other large strategy organization might produce. They have their place. And so you have to understand what the constraints are around a specific opinion, and recognize that with each scenario, each opportunity company, some of the factors change that the criteria changes for an input that to the criteria will change and will deviate an opinion from what's real in my own organization. So you have to be careful when you're using professional opinions, because they're good start points. They're good to help you. They're good for confirming. I like to use multiple points when I'm trying to confirm a strategy, confirm an understanding of something. I go to multiple sources, and what they do is they only give you confidence that they give you a high degree of confidence that I'm doing the right things, but they should never be applied in a way that says this is the gospel and I'm going to be using this in my own scenario. You have to apply your own criteria and requirements to that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, very much. And then you've also got, you talked earlier about change management, Tony, and how change management is such an important part of this. And that human dynamic is A, super unpredictable, and B, it's one of the biggest variables or impacts to your implementation duration and complexity and cost and all that good stuff. And that's probably the hardest part to predict, is how your organization is actually going to respond to the changes and how well they're going to adapt to the changes. What about this question? Another question here from LinkedIn, which is an interesting one, is what do you do when a client thinks, because of vendor pressure that they're receiving, that they need a certain system or software, but their requirements tell a different story? Is that, I'm sure that never happens in our industry, right? A vendor pressuring a client or trying to convince them that their software is a good fit when in fact it's not. How do you vet that out? I mean, what are some of the things you've seen with our clients as far as getting past that?
Funny. I just recently had one of those as well too. So yeah. I think and you do see vendors, putting that kind of pressure on an organization. I think the best solution to that, right, is to again come back with as much verification from multiple sources that will help an organization feel comfortable that maybe what a vendor is saying may not be exactly what the perception of the marketplace. At some point, you've got to say, okay, the market says this. We got multiple validation points that maybe an opinion is a little bit different than what the way others are seeing it. The other thing too is you got to always come back to say, so my requirements are dictating that I need this type of software, this system with these capabilities. You have to be sure that you understand what your capabilities are relative to a specific requirement or feature of a technology, and have a good understanding of what that is. So if you've done your homework and you've dug in, if you hired someone to do it for you and they've dug in and identified the requirements at a level that you feel comfortable with, right, then you can feel comfortable that maybe you have a different set of opinion than the vendors are providing to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that clarity that you started off the conversation talking about, that clarity of where you're headed as an organization, what your goals and objectives are, and how this project potentially aligns with that strategy. I think that it just sort of gives you the guardrails and the vision and the direction to be able to vet some of that out. So it becomes more clear when it's not a good fit or when it is a good fit, whatever technology you might be considering.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. Recently had a client that where the client was told that the vendor had a public versus private cloud solution, and while their public cloud solution may not have met all the requirements their private cloud solution would, right? Well, if you were looking for a certain level of control and extensibility that you might get in a little bit more on-premise like scenario, then yeah, that might play to what you want to do. But if your long-term strategy, right, is to really conform to the capabilities that a cloud would provide you and the gains that you get from a cloud, there's some trade-off that you have to consider. And that's one of the things that, again, a digital strategy helps us to understand too. What are the trade-offs when I'm trying to determine a path to go down. And so one of the trade-offs, obviously, in a private cloud might be that I'm gaining some things and more control, but I'm also going to incur some cost in the same way that I had on premise. And so you've got to be very careful that you understand the trade-offs that you're getting when you're going down certain paths like that. So we had one of those here recently.
Yeah, that's a great point. That last thing you said, which is there's always trade-offs. Even when you've defined your digital strategy, you've selected the technology or technologies that are going to best align with that. Even that best fit for your path forward is going to have risks and trade-offs. And you started off the conversation by talking a little bit about risks too. And I think that's another thing is, it's exciting to define a digital strategy. You want to be optimistic and think about this ideal future state, but you also have to recognize that there's some landmine pitfalls along the way that we've got to navigate.
As IT organizations, we have to be very careful, especially if you have a culture that says, I want to build something, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be, we all want to be creative when it comes to our jobs. But if you've got companies that have put a lot of investment, as many of these ERP companies have done in their software, years and years of development across multiple industries. They've looked at every many scenarios for requirements. They just have a lot built in, a lot of money and investment. So you have to start again. This is where having a digital strategy helps you stay on target, because if you're wanting to build something as opposed to conform to a solution, technology, digital solution, but the cost is going to be, you're not gaining anything. This is where your digital strategy and the alignment of that digital strategy kind of keeps you on course. Again, you got something to go back to that says, if I move away from a specific strategy that will get me at a certain goal or and maybe it's a financial goal, then this is where that strategy comes into play and kind of helps you stay on course with those types of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're here at Tony Ford talking about digital strategy and software selection. We're going to take a quick break and we'll return with more of the conversation. In the meantime, you're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 67. We're here at Tony Ford talking about digital strategy and software selection. Here's a question from John on YouTube. He asked the question, what are the best practices for change management when introducing a digital strategy? That's a pretty big question, but maybe you could cherry pick a couple things that you've seen, and you're introducing or defining a digital strategy. What are some of the key things that you should keep in mind or focus on or address?
Yeah, I think, certainly it's really important to take the pulse of your organization. We often do surveys. Those can be controversial, and there's can be some sensitivity to those to surveys. But surveys are good, especially from the people's perspective, to get a feel for how change is going to play in your organization. And you certainly want to be able to flesh out where there may be some potential resistance. Resistance can be on purpose, or it can be, there's resistance, direct and indirect resistance. And so you want to try to flesh out those things and try to understand and so that you can start to build the right programs around them. In particular, a lot of organizational changes focus around communication. So you want to make sure that you are being effective, not only doing the digital transformation exercise, because people get a little nervous there, but also when you start down your digital roadmap, the various projects, how do you communicate the value? How do you communicate the change that's coming? That sort of thing. The other thing too is to make sure that you have a good understanding operationally where the impact of change is going to occur.
Yeah.
So change is really two things. It's organizational and it's operational. So making sure, we typically do in a digital strategy exercise, we try to do our best at understanding both operational and organizational. We tend to get, when we do our functional deep dive, we get a little bit more understanding around the operational level, but you certainly want to understand those. And of course, and to develop the appropriate programs to help with the transformation as you move forward.
Yeah. So what about hypothetical but real scenario that I think you and I have both seen? I'm a CIO or a client, and I say, Tony, that's great. I know most of your other clients have problems with change management, but our team's ready for this change. They hate the old technology. They know the processes are broken. And so change management is really not going to be an issue. It's going to be pretty easy for us. Is that something you've seen? And if so, how do you overcome that misperception that change is somehow going to be easy because people are on board with the change early on?
Yeah. The first thing is we do try to convince especially doing the executive digital strategy is to get the executive to test that a little bit. There's no harm in doing some level of surveying to get a feel for what that looks like, and what we try to do is we tell them that when you think there's not resistance to change, there always is some resistance organizationally to change. And depending on the scope of the change, the numbers of operational areas are going to be impacted. If the scope tends to be fairly broad, you can almost guarantee that there's going to be some fear, some concern about the newer technologies. You're going to get something there. Then the other thing too is you start to point out as you're going through workshops, you start to point out those sorts of things start to surface in workshops. And so one of the things that we've done as we go through digital strategy is we do like a checkpoint at some point. We use a list of observations that we see in some of our workshops, especially the ones that start to validate an opinion that we have about organizational change or processes, and where some of the pain in the organization may be. We start to, outside of identifying specific pain points, we raise observations that we think are important that the executive teams need to be aware of. And so we try to flush those out. So it's kind of two things. It's one, you use surveys, but you're also capturing observations during the workshops and trying to flush those things out and raise the visibility to the organization, executive organization.
Yeah,
that may be their perception. And a lot of times what we find is the executive perception may be a little bit off as you move down the ranks a little bit. Often what we do, another strategy that we do is if we're going through executive workshop, we separate. If it's a large organization, we can do this, but we'll separate workshops between, say, the senior executive team and maybe an operational management layer. And what the idea here is to see, is there alignment with the executive team and the mid-level management team that may be actually in the operational, managing the operational functions. And that's another litmus test to see how aligned the executive team is with their mid-level operational folks.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think that really hits the point that I was trying to get at with that question or that hypothetical scenario where, I think first of all, it's important to clarify that most resistance to change doesn't come from a bad place. It's not like you or I are just trying to sabotage the project and, I don't like what the company's doing. You see that occasionally, but that's not very common. What typically happens is on the surface, yes, I'm on board, but if I'm not aligned, to your point, if the organization's not aligned, that's going to create unintentionally some resistance to change along the way. Or, one thing you did mention, but it kind of getting down another level of granularity more to a personal level is if you threaten my world the world that I'm so accustomed to, then I'm going to resist change. Not because not because I want any ill will toward the organization, or I don't trust leadership necessarily, or even it may not even be that I'm not against the change. It's just I'm okay with the change in general. Just I don't like the way it's affecting me. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like that becomes, you multiply that times however many employees you have. That's the resistance you have to deal with. It's that underlying unexpected resistance.
It's interesting on some of our organizational change surveys. We do tenure-based surveys where we will have specific areas and we'll do it by tenure and we'll do it by organization. It's kind of funny sometimes when you see the tenure. There's a difference of perspective when you look at tenure. So some of that's just I've been doing it this way for so long, and change is a little harder for some folks. So it's an age thing, but it's also a personality thing. Some people, I think, consultants, for example, we're creatures of change, and so we tend not to get uncomfortable when change occurs. But some folks like a more static environment. So it's a personality thing. So.
Yeah. And if I've been in an organization for a long time and I've created value for myself by powering through the fact that we have such inefficient processes and bad systems, but yet I'm able to navigate that and figure out a way to add value, that's a threat. If you talk about automating the systems and taking away some of those manual processes and some of those heroics that the organization has depended on me personally for, that's a threat, that's a risk, and I start to feel at risk. And so that's where the resistance oftentimes stems from, is that real personal level. What about here's a question that's right up your alley. It's actually a little bit outside the scope of what we're talking about now, but it's sort of like a downstream thing that I know you're very well versed in, which is how important is it to have a cost estimate done and agreed with the vendor before getting into implementation, and how can you manage the potential cost escalation along the way? So we're sort of getting into PMO, project governance, and that sort of thing here. But what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, for us, the cost estimation actually starts during the digital strategy transformation. We use our own set of tools to go through some high-level initial estimation, and that's exactly what it was. I think the key with cost is to also make sure that whatever cost estimation, that you put some parameters around it so that everyone understands exactly what you're looking at and what the implications are coming out of a specific cost estimate. So as we move from a digital strategy to a software selection, to maybe an implementation readiness, to the actual implementation, you're seeing the cost estimates become more real as you the cycle. So I think it's important as you're going through the process of developing cost estimates that you understand where you are in the cycle and what value. I had one customer, we did some cost estimation coming out of digital strategy. And of course, there's always some concern about, well, what do I do with this, right? What if I've got to go to a board, how do I position? So it's really important to make sure that you position the cost estimate so that the audience that's targeted understands what it means and what the implications are and what's the value at this point in looking at a specific estimate. So I think a point is just to recognize where you are in the cycle and where and how you position an estimate.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, downstream, when you get into implementation and you start executing that digital strategy, that's where the project governance, the controls, all that stuff becomes so important.
Yeah, and the implementation project, obviously, right before an implementation, your SI, your system integrator, is probably going to have gone through some type of discovery to really specifically nail down as best they can and a statement of work for a contract. So, at that point, obviously, from a system integrator standpoint, they're going to be about as close as they're going to get until they actually get into the implementation. Obviously, even when you get into implementation, there is some potential for change because I get in there, I start to uncover things that I couldn't see before. Our invalidated assumption about the project, and that changes the cost because there's some additional effort to get done. So absolutely.
Right. So I guess the last question for you is sort of a capstone to tie this all up, this whole thread of digital strategy and software selection. What do you think, as we think and cast our minds forward to our digital strategies for the 2020s, even though this is a digital strategy, to your point, is not just about technology, it's about the people, the process, the overall strategic alignment, all the stuff you talked about, data, infrastructure, all that stuff's important. But when you think about technology and we're looking at different digital options in the marketplace, what are some of the most important technology trends that organizations should be aware of as they define their digital strategies? Or what are some of the emerging technologies or trends that you think people should really have top of mind or consider that they might not otherwise?
Let's see here. Certainly migration to the cloud, and I keep saying this, but making sure you understand with cloud and migration to the cloud, the different components, the different iterations of cloud implementations. And I'm going to come back to the public versus the private, making sure you understand what that looks like in terms of your own organization. But certainly that's probably the most important trend right now. Making sure that your points of integration and the technologies around supporting that are very important. Because again, everything, because we're building, we've kind of moved more to a Lego kind of, if I can use that, a Lego world where we're building a framework where I've got a platform that allows me to build in and take out components. It becomes very important. So making sure, and I say cloud, but just making sure that your infrastructure, that layer allows for change, because you're on a path. You got to look at this as a path, a journey. And I'm going to assume you are going to be changing your technology. So I think that becomes very important. Not in addition to just your software as a service, that software layer and the data layer, but to make sure that your infrastructure layer is addressing your long-term needs. And it becomes even more important because I always use that example of building a house on sand. If you build a house on sand, it's going to sink. Mm-hmm. So building your digital strategy on a strong foundation so that I can change. One of the scenarios that we had for one of our clients here recently was all things equal. We had to look at their strategy around the platform of the infrastructure vendor they were going to go with. And ultimately, it dictated what software provider they were going to go with, because they had invested a long-term strategy in a cloud solution, cloud provider, the tie between one cloud provider and the other layers of this technology stack, data and application, became more important. It was actually the game changer for the decision process versus the other two finalists, where they had the software and the platform layer being owned by two different organizations. So, and that they hadn't made a significant investment. It became a big part of the decision process. So,
for me,
so those tend to be the area that for me is more about making sure that you understand the components and the decision process around the components as opposed to some of the technology trends.
Yeah, it's a good point, because we can get caught up in analysis paralysis, as I mentioned before, but looking at machine learning and AI and RPA and lots of cool stuff, right? I mean, a lot of the vendors are investing pretty heavily in these emerging technologies, but to your point, it's the different components of the digital strategy that's the more important thing, is making sure all fits and supports your strategy.
For sure. Some of the ones you just mentioned, you're seeing. I personally have not looking at ERP solutions. Business intelligence is still a dominant theme when we're talking about solutions. It's been in particular where people are trying to really get a 360 view of things. I want to see the 360 view of my customer, self-service capabilities so that I can allow my customers and suppliers and other partners to have an understanding of how they're interacting with me. The Internet of Things has become, I'm seeing that more and more as we discuss technology solutions. So all the ones that we just talked about, but we're seeing those, but they're, again, they're becoming more and more the extensions. And so we have to just focus on the components and making sure that our drivers are validating any technology solutions. For me, the trend around digital transformation, building the blueprint and the strategies and the roadmaps are becoming more trend because organizations are starting to recognize the importance of investing in the effort to make sure they understand. And it's not just the big, the large cap kind of firms that are doing that. Some of the small organizations are recognizing now that they need to really be taking a little bit more holistic view because it's the life or, especially in the smaller firms, it's the life or death of my business. If I don't understand, I had one small company, just one more time, one small company, and they were not very efficient in their supply chain. All the classic problems, I can't see, there's no integration. And the speed of delivery was the most important aspect of their business. And because they use a lot of international, they export it, having a digital connection to their shipment, the ocean carriers was extremely important. So you can see right away, having a holistic of the business, I can't just fix one area without understanding all of the business. So that became very important for them.
Yeah. Very interesting. All right, good stuff. Thanks, Tony. Thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate the conversation and a lot of ground we covered there. So I'm curious to unpack this a bit more with Kyler. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we return from that break, Kyler and I will unpack some of the key concepts and interesting takeaways from the conversation with Tony. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings, and the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Fire to the bone. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, the people, process, strategy, and technology aspects of change. And by the way, the only technology podcast out there that is named after a David Bowie song. So a lot of people don't know that was named after the song Space Oddity. There's a reference to ground control to Major Tom, is sort of the main theme or the lyrics to the song. The only bad news with it, the cool thing is it is related to a cool song, but the bad news, if you listen to the lyrics, they lose contact with Major Tom and he's presumed to be dead. So we're going to set aside that part of it because that's like the dark side of the name. But the whole idea here is, let's create a ground control for people going through digital transformations, minus the dark side of that song. So anyway, I digress. But the point we want to come back to here is we had Tony Ford on the show talking about digital strategy and software selection. What were some of your thoughts or takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, well, he definitely looked at some of the dark side of what what can happen if you don't understand digital strategy and software selection, and most importantly, the difference between the two, I think is something in the first part of your conversation that is so important. I know I wrote down when he said, really, the compass is the strategy, right? And the software selection is just a different direction that you're going within that overall strategy. And I think a lot of times, our community and our audience, and sometimes some of our clients, which is why they engage third stage, is there is no digital strategy. There's just a need, or someone in the executive team, it's just a need for a new technology. And they skip kind of that strategic piece. I actually just interviewed one of our amazing clients today, and that was one of the biggest takeaways is they needed more of a strategic approach up front, as opposed to someone just saying, and in this case, it was a smaller organization, the CEO just saying, hey, we need a new technology and we need an ERP system, as opposed to letting kind of the tail wag the dog situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a point that Tony articulated really well, as far as, first of all, the difference between digital strategy and software selection. They're sort of two different things. Software selection could be part of the digital strategy, but there's a lot more to it than just the technology piece. And, to his point, one of the things he mentioned was the need to have your future state defined and your future state business processes, so that, to your point, the dog is wagging the tail rather than the tail wagging the dog with technology. You don't necessarily you want technology to enable process improvements, but you don't need to be hamstrung by the limitations of certain technologies. So really having that clear vision of what you want the software to do, and then finding and implementing the technology that can best enable that is really the best path to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to go along with that is understanding those requirements. It can seem like the least fun part about the transformation or the new software, but I think a lot of times that's where companies can be led astray, especially if they don't have an independent consultant, and they're just working with a software vendor. So many times those requirements or those needs of the unique business are kind of transformed, either intentionally or unintentionally, a lot of the times, to meet the needs of the software, as opposed to the other way around. And I almost wanted to get like Tony as a senior manager, and then like a Brian Lockaruba or a Dave Beldick involved in that conversation, who is very, very operations focused, and go through like, what are requirements and what does that mean as far as why it's important within these selections. Because I think a lot of those times those can be missed, or either missed or misinterpreted.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, sometimes it's obvious in some cases what the changes or the opportunities for improvement are, but a lot of times it's not so obvious, and it's hard for people to think outside the box of what they've always done, or how modern technologies in general might help you rethink your processes or your business model in general. So I totally agree with that.
Absolutely. And something I wanted to dig into a little bit more, which I learned a lot about from actually talking to Adam about what it means to sunset a system. And I think that's one of the pieces, especially now in our current climate, of vendors wanting to migrate to a cloud solution, and a lot of times kind of pushing or pressuring clients into doing that. So can you talk a little bit, Eric, about what it means to have a system that is sunsetting, or that a certain vendor will stop supporting? I had assumed that meant that like you need to figure something out tomorrow, but it sounds like it's a longer journey around that, and it really depends on the organization as opposed to the vendor on what they want to do there.
Yeah, it's I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, because on one hand, you don't want the software vendor dictating to you your time frame for when or how or if you upgrade your technology. I mean, that should be strictly a business decision. So it actually really irritates me to see software vendors that are playing this game, in the marketplace. And if you think about it, they're really, in a lot of ways, it's a slightly more acceptable version of terrorism. I mean, it's like corporate terrorism. Basically, you're saying, hey, you've got all your data and all your processes in our software, and we're going to take that software away. To me, that's totally unacceptable. I have no idea how they get away with it, or why they even think that's an effective tactic. Unfortunately, it is sort of working. It's forcing organizations into a bit of a panic to where they think, well, I've got 2 or 3 years of support on this system, and now I need to get off the system. And it's no one vendor that's doing this. It's across the board. It's an
Yeah.
industry problem, and I think it's highly unethical. But rather than going down that soapbox rabbit hole, I'll just say that if you're a customer of SAP, of Oracle legacy products, of Microsoft Great Plains or Navision or Xapta, even Infor, Epicor, any of the big software vendors, most of them, if not all of them, have a plan to sunset their on-premise legacy solutions. And even the ones that don't admit it, I should say, they're starting to divert dollars away from on-premise R&D to shifting most, if not all, of their R&D dollars to their cloud offerings. So there's a number of different ways that they're just sort of, kind of making that shift, which is fair enough if that's what they want to do. But the part that bothers me is the fact that they're sort of forcing customers off and saying, hey, we're going to sunset this product and stop supporting it after 2 or 3 years. Now, having said that, just because a vendor stops supporting a product doesn't necessarily mean you have to get off that system. It may be beneficial longer term, of course, but it's not the end of the world if you keep using a system that's no longer supported, especially if you've built some level of internal competency to maintain and manage that system. But most larger and mid-sized organizations don't want to take that risk of having no support if something breaks or something happens. So you're in a situation now where a lot of organizations are hamstrung. They're kind of backed into a corner here. So now, after all that, I forgot what your question was. I don't even know.
I think I was just asking you to speak to just what it means to be a sunset system, because I think that panic and disruption, that's really the root of the problem, right? Is a lot of times they say, hey, I'm going to sunset this system. We have, the X, Y, and Z system, and it might not be the right timing for the organization, yet they panic like we, talk about. It almost reminds me of, how people get weird in airports, because it's just like it's the one place where it's acceptable to act like a crazy person, because you're in this sense of constant panic that you're not going to make your flight. And it's the same with the industry too, is you almost are like, here, take all of my money at an incredibly inflated price, and then also treat me like garbage, and thank you so much, I will fly on your airline again, type of thing. So it just kind of reminds me, and hopefully, always the optimist over here, is that, a new generation, a new evolution, new competition in the marketplace will kind of shake that overall authoritism loose, in the fact that customer service will become, a number one competitive advantage. But it sounds like at this point, like I said, sunsetting can be totally misunderstood, in the fact that you really need to dig into what that means with a private independent expert, as opposed to the vendor just understanding that concept of that professional skepticism, right, within that world.
Yeah, and it's also, in a lot of ways, it's you're forcing organizations to go from their on-premise legacy systems to some sort of cloud solution. And there's a lot of risk and escalated costs that go along with cloud solutions. And by the way, it's mainly the investors of these software vendors that really like cloud. I mean, that if you think about it, that more than anything is what's driving the cloud. In my opinion, I think investors and money and profitability on the vendor side of the equation, that's what's driving cloud adoption more than demand. There certainly is a demand. There are benefits to cloud solutions, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a lot of dark side, a lot of costs that people don't talk about. And I think, so I think that's what you have to do, to your point, have that independent agnostic advisor that can help you see those blind spots and help you navigate this jump from where you are today to potential setting of a solution to whatever your replacement product might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Question on the cloud for you that you had kind of talked about. Can you explain the difference between, say, a public versus a private cloud, and what that might mean for an organization?
Yeah, so a private cloud, I would, to simplify it, I would view private cloud as almost like a hybrid between on-prem and cloud. So in other words, if it's a private cloud, that means you've got a certain amount of infrastructure that's carved out for you, and you install the software in that infrastructure in the cloud, but you can still do what you want with it. You can tailor it, or you can customize it. You can do whatever integration you want. And so you have the flexibility of on-premise, but it's just someone else is hosting it. With public cloud, it's more akin to the multi-tenant SaaS cloud, where you have sort of like your Gmail, or if you get on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, technically that's a multi-tenant public cloud because it's one instance that everyone's accessing. When you go to your Gmail, for example, if you use Gmail for your email, you can't. You're pretty limited in what you can customize. It works a certain way. You can make it look a little bit different, make it look pretty, and change the color scheme and stuff like that. But in general, the workflow you can't change. But if you install Microsoft Outlook on your computer, you can totally change that, and you can, you just have more flexibility in that way. So I would say that that's like the Gmail example is more like what public cloud is. It's multiple. It's one single version of the software that's being accessed by hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of organizations. Of course, they have their own data, their own configuration of the software, but they can't make material changes to the software because other people are using that same cloud solution.
Absolutely. Well, that's really helpful. Is there a risk associated with either? Is one more risky than the other?
I'd say I don't know that there's one's riskier. It's just they're different kinds of risk. So like with multi-tenant or public cloud, the risk there is that you are limited in what you can change. So if a software has a deficiency, which every software system out there has some sort of deficiency or misalignments with what your needs are, you're somewhat limited into what you can do with that. On the flip side, with private cloud, a lot of companies get themselves into trouble because they can customize, and just because they can customize doesn't mean they should. So they end up changing and tweaking the software in a way that isn't beneficial, or might be more risky longer term. And then I guess a second downside of private cloud, back to my point earlier, is that more of the software vendors are putting more and more R&D into the multi-tenant public cloud SaaS solutions, that sort of thing, because that's highly scalable and it's highly profitable. So you're going to see over time, I think you're just going to see more and more of their money and their R&D shifting to that public cloud model versus the private cloud. For right now, though, I think there's just too much demand for private cloud, and organizations are still rightfully a bit skeptical about going all in, in terms of public cloud. So those are some of the things to consider.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, again, we could spend so much time talking about this as well, but such a great talk. The one last piece I'll just leave on the table is he did say, after he was talking about trends, and you guys were talking about, one of the biggest issues is sometimes the scope is too broad, and some different trends you've seen in the industry. He said sometimes digital transformation can be life or death for smaller organizations. And I thought that was worth just noting, that there is, a humongous risk to implementing new technology. And if you don't do it the right way that makes sense for your organization, with the right system that makes sense for your organization, for smaller organizations, it really can, make or break their overall growth model, as well as just their overall budget. So I thought that was an interesting kind of one of his final thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that's something to keep in mind that a lot of organizations have to think about is what the right path is. And, it all comes down to the business value and the pros and cons and the cost benefit and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, great talk. And as always, Tony has such great content. He has if you'd like to hear more from Tony, he has an excellent keynote from actually our Digital Stratosphere 2021, where he talks about project governance. And I know I learned a ton from that presentation. Is available on our YouTube channel. If you simply search Tony Ford on our YouTube channel, all of his content will come up, and I highly recommend that keynote if you are going through a digital transformation. He really does a great job of kind of laying out not only the strategy, but how to make sure you stay aligned with your project timeline and budget. Yeah, good. So we'll make sure people check that out. And that you said that Stratosphere 2021. It is, yeah. And it's still on our YouTube channel. You can go to the playlist of Stratosphere 2021 to see all of our keynotes and panels from that actual event. And then you can also just search Tony if you wanted to look into more of the information that he provided specifically.
Good deal. All right. Well, that's a good conversation. I know we could talk another hour or two on this topic, but I think that's a good place to leave it for now. And we'll have Tony back on and talk more about that topic and other topics that he's familiar with. So thanks for Tony, or thanks to Tony for being here on the show. So we're going to shift gears a bit, and when we come back from a quick break, we're going to talk with Josh Noble, who's a guest on our show. I think a first-time guest on this podcast for sure. Talking about sales technology and the culture of change that goes along with that, or the culture of change that should go along with that to make for a successful transformation within a sales organization. So we'll take a quick break and we'll have Josh back on the show. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 67. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as all the audio podcast platforms on your podcast listening device. Our next guest is Josh Noble, who is on the show for the first time, and he's going to be talking about sales technology and how to create that culture of change that should augment a sales technology transformation. So with all that being said, and actually, by the way, before we get to him, this is a clip that you recorded for our sister podcast, Digital Stratosphere. So this is Kyler interviewing Josh. So we're going to play you that clip from our sister podcast. By the way, if you haven't subscribed to that, that's our second podcast that you can find on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms. So you can just search Digital Stratosphere on whatever platform you listen or watch, and you can find this interview as well as tons of other interviews that you do on that channel, Kyler. So all that being said, let's cut to the clip of you interviewing Josh Noble.
So we are talking about sales tech specifically today and the digital transformation specifically within Josh's industry, which is shipping and fulfillment. So obviously there's been a huge digital transformation and a very exciting years that Josh is going to kind of take us through how you leverage sales tech to make sure that you can achieve the most business value for your organization. So with that, Josh, will you kind of just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in ShipOffers?
Yeah, definitely. So like Kyler said, Josh Noble, I'm the VP of Sales over at ShipOffers. ShipOffers, we are a product sourcing and fulfillment company. Been in business over 21 years, specifically working with online marketers on the e-commerce and direct response industries. So we help with sourcing products, basically anything coming in from China, widgets that you see like on your Facebook, people selling products who don't want to sell on Amazon. We're helping bring those products in or helping manufacture them here in the US as well. We contract manufacture with 8 different contract manufacturers and then warehouse them and then integrate with their CRM shopping carts and provide all the back-end logistics of shipping directly to their consumers.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Definitely an exciting time to be involved in not only the e-commerce industry, but also the shipping and fulfillment industries. We've seen a lot of disruption and changes within that industry over the last couple of years with the COVID-19 pandemic. So can you tell us a little bit about your footprint from a client or partner standpoint?
Yeah, so I mean, we work with clients. Well, one, we ship all over the world, but also our clients are located all over the world. So primarily Europe, Australia, Asia, then also within the US and Canada are where most of our clientele is based out of. But and then from a customer standpoint, they're working everywhere and or they're selling everywhere. And then from a partner standpoint, we work with a lot of strategic partners for what we do, offering different solutions to them, whether it's from the processing, customer service, whatever they need. So we have partners lined up for our clients, and they're primarily in the U.S. But we have some partners outside the U.S. as well.
Very cool. And then, so can you kind of give us the 60-second overview of how your last 2 years have been? Just kidding. That's totally impossible. But
It's volatile. It's
yeah,
been
okay.
a lot of growth, but a lot of headaches.
Yeah. So can you kind of tell us what your client community has experienced during that time?
Yeah, I mean, from a client standpoint, I mean, there's been a ton of growth, obviously, in the space with e-commerce and selling online. So everyone's been growing rapidly, but supply chain has definitely felt disruptions. And so, and we're right in the middle of that, and where our clients are trusting us for that. So that's been a fun year of kind of going through that. But even then, from a communication standpoint with our clients, our industry that we're in is very much about connection at like events and things like that. From a sales standpoint, that's where we got a lot of our clients from. We're at trade shows or conferences. And that obviously got disrupted from a sales standpoint, we had to completely go a different direction. And our clients, from being able to find traffic through affiliates and things like that, had to go a completely different direction, because a lot of these conferences is where they'd find partnerships as well.
So what kind of different directions or what kind of tactics were you able to excavate from this really intense period of changes?
Yeah, so I mean, everyone kind of tried the virtual event type thing, and it went well. Some were better than others, I guess you could say, but really just in like different social media communities like Facebook groups and things like that. And we were able to be a part of those and find a lot of connection on there, and be able to, people found a sense of kind of community through that, which is what a lot of our clients were looking for. We're working with a lot of small businesses, solopreneurs, who they're generating, millions a month in revenue, but it's pretty much a couple people, and they outsource a lot of their teams. So they're looking for that community. And so having Facebook groups, having a lot of video conferences and things like that is really where we had to focus on and get better at as a team, because we couldn't jump on a plane and go see our clients.
Right, definitely. And I want to get in a little bit later to those strategic partnerships, because I think that's so interesting in, the evolution of developing and harvesting those relationships in a digital ecosystem. But from a basic shipping and fulfillment standpoint, what are some of the challenges that you faced as an organization in knowing that that entire industry was sort of flipped upside down?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a slow rollout of pain points, because the supply chain, we're still feeling it now.
Yeah,
Honestly,
sure.
it's probably worse now than it was a year ago from a supply chain logistical standpoint.
Awesome.
At first, it was our staffing just at the warehouse. I mean,
Right.
that
Sure.
was a huge pain point, because of everything with COVID, no one had to go to work. And so we had to drastically increase our starting pay to incentivize that, and really kind of cater around making sure that we were meeting everyone's needs, I guess you could say, from a hiring standpoint. And then from there, from a supply chain side, I mean, getting product in, all of our products, we do a lot with like supplements and nutraceutical products that are manufactured in the US. All those raw materials coming in from overseas, that got delayed. Outside of that, all packaging, honestly, that was probably the biggest, and still is the biggest headache, are bottles.
Interesting.
And it became kind of a logistical nightmare. And so we worked hard with our manufacturers and partners to do a lot of blanket POs and overbuy, honestly. And
Interesting. Yeah.
with the growth, we were fortunately in a good position to do that, which enabled us to continue to grow.
That's excellent. I know we talk a lot about, specifically from a small to medium-sized business standpoint, is that inventory challenge and that surplus. And a lot of times our team members don't have that capital to be able to invest in that surplus of inventory.
Yep.
So it's amazing that you guys were able to support that, those smaller market opportunities
Yep.
with those raw materials. So on kind of that supply chain diversification, were you able to stick with the same manufacturers, or did you have to diversify your portfolio?
So, I mean, we have manufacturers that we've worked with since before we were a company. Even the owners, Doug and Tony, they used to sell products online 20 plus years ago before ShipOffers was in business, and we've had some long relationships. So the trust there and the flexibility there, they're willing to work with us. So we made sure we're using those, but we did have to go out and expand our partnership and make sure there weren't any bottlenecks. And because some manufacturers would experience delays, or even manufacturers would get shut down for a week during the pandemic. And so we had to diversify in a big way.
That's amazing that you were able to kind of overcome that and still sustain that growth within that marketplace. How would you say, just from being an expert in this space, that a lot of times that diversification in bigger shipments, like we talk about our construction industry, lumber, we talk about the furniture industry a lot, those bigger types of goods, what is something that you feel like different owners, specifically small businesses, can do to kind of overcome that supply chain strain?
I mean, from a bigger shipment side, we stay away from that personally. Obviously, we have pallets of product coming in, but shipping direct to consumer, we stick in those smaller packages. But from I don't know, it's hard. I mean, you have to constantly. The squeaky wheel kind of gets things done. That is what we've noticed, even from a carrier standpoint, because pallets would be stuck wherever they are. You don't know where they are, and so constantly picking up the phone, dialing. Our purchasing team did a great job of really making sure they're actively in communication with their carriers, manufacturers, everyone at all times, and not just put an order and hoping it shows up when they say it does. So communication and the relationship side of that is huge, and just looking at it, continuing to evaluate carriers, because we've gone through that several times already this year with evaluating carriers. And making sure pricing, because there's a lot of price increases, and they still want our volume, but you kind of have to play the game.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. A lot of times our conversations around supply chain can be through really technical operations, but I think that relationship building is equally as important as being able to leverage that technology to see really the visibility or the breakage within your supply chain. So that's a really unique perspective.
Yeah, we definitely consider ourselves very much a relationship company, not just with our clients or partners, but with our suppliers as well. And it's helped us move things along, especially during the pandemic. That relationship's paid off.
That's excellent. So from a sales standpoint, because I know I asked you to come on here and talk about sales, and now I'm asking you about supply chain and packaging. That's just what I do usually, is make sure our guests are put on the spot most effectively. So from a sales standpoint, you obviously manage your sales team, and how have you leveraged the technology evolution of being able to grow in that space as a sales organization?
Yeah, so I've been with the company now for a little over 6 years. And when I started, I was a salesperson, I was the account manager, I was the biz dev person, I was basically wearing all the hats on that side of it. And so we didn't have to have systems really that were duplicatable in a sense. And so over the years, we've gone through multiple CRMs. We used Pipedrive for a while, and now we're using HubSpot because our needs have changed and shifted. We use Asana for project management that kind of plugs in there, and different plugins. There's not for what we do, there's not a good CRM that kind of fits all of our needs. And so it's kind of taking different softwares and piecing them together to make the system that works. But even then, I mean, we've gone from everyone being in office, and now we have remote employees across the country. So it's expanded out. So we've had to improve our systems and our tech to create more visibility, which from a sales standpoint, salespeople are the worst at using systems. I'm a salesperson. Logging, tracking, all of that. And so creating systems that are easy for them to use, making sure they're willing to implement it, and getting buy-in from them is super important.
Well, great stuff, Josh. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we are going to continue to discuss the culture of change within sales organization and the shipping industry.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I am here with Josh Noble, VP of Sales for ShipOffers. Today we're talking about sales tech, what it's like to implement a CRM and create a culture of change here within the shipping industry. Yeah, so just to unpack that a little, I want to talk about how you selected a CRM, specifically within a high growth environment. Because like you said, it was kind of built in-house internally, right? You went to one system and they kind of graduated, if you will, or evolved into another system. So what were some of those requirements or needs that caused you to reevaluate your CRM opportunity and customer relationship management, for those of you that are not in the acronym world?
Yeah. So Pipedrive was actually really good. We used that for a few years. It was just very simple, which is what our team needed. And then going into HubSpot, we needed more marketing capabilities and list management, which HubSpot is very good for that. And then tying in and kind of manipulating a bit for how we wanted to manage our sales pipeline within HubSpot. But we don't use it in a traditional fashion. So we worked with their team, which they were really easy to work with, which is a huge thing. But one of our VPs on our team had previous experience with HubSpot at a company. So that, going through the different kind of tutorials from a cost standpoint, it made sense as well. And so, after going through it, we're still only scratching the surface, honestly, capabilities, and it's a continued build out.
So when you went through that implementation, if you will, of the technology for your team as the leader, what were some of the pain points that you saw throughout that transition? And like you said, leveraging sales professionals that aren't always kind of in the technical space, and making sure that, we are leveraging the technology because it does bring business value.
Yeah. And so the technology for us, it brings value in multiple ways, but a big way is making sure we're not leaving opportunities on the table, right? And so with our sales team, and it starts with the top, with myself using it and actually buying in and leading by example a bit there. But then from there, making sure that KPIs, because from our sales team, we have different bonus structures, and one of the KPIs is to make sure that you're hitting kind of your logging metrics and things like that within HubSpot. So incentivizing that, and then from there, I'd also talk about making sure that our sales team are focused on the right things. And I know for me, when I was in a sales executive role, doing the logging of everything, because our clients are communicating across like multiple channels, like Slack, Skype, email, phone, WhatsApp, like you name it, they're communicating with us on it.
Wow.
And so trying to get all those to funnel into one CRM is not realistic. And so you have to do a lot of logging. And what we did is we really tried to enable the salesperson to focus on what they do best, which is the relationships, the networking, being in touch with the client, and then bringing in support staff to support them with a lot of the logging and also the implementation internally.
Yeah, I think a lot of times CRMs seem much more simple than they actually are, specifically from a sales standpoint.
Right.
And it's very easy, at least in our experience, to fall down that rabbit hole of, all of a sudden you were a salesperson and now you're spending 20% of the time that you could be selling actually logging. And Eric and I talk about this a lot And I always say, I am a, self-aware resistor in the sales area, because I always was, hey, I'm selling the most. Like, I don't need to log any of this. Obviously, my process is working.
Right.
So if I worked for you, would you A, fire me, or B, how would you help me understand the overall motivation? Obviously, KPIs are there, but when you have a high performing, salesperson, they're already meeting a lot of those KPIs.
For sure.
So how do you kind of communicate that change management messaging?
I mean, I think it's a leadership conversation with them. I mean, if they're super high performing, if they're not being a leader and buying into the culture of the team and everything and really resisting that, that's a different conversation and a bigger issue, which I've had that. But if they're bought into the team and they're all about helping lead, they're going to want to lead by example. One, but two, I also don't want to take away from what they're doing. And so I think the support staff, like, that's what I did for myself, and it helped. And so knowing that, and then enabling my team to get support around it, we do kind of like a drainers and drivers list of like things you love, things you hate,
Yeah.
and what you do. And so identifying those things that take away from what drives them, which ultimately salespeople are very money driven, and goal driven. And so behind that, being able to allow them to focus on that, because they're driving business for the company. And if they're doing a great job of it, but they need help with some of the behind the scenes stuff, that's where you have to bring in support.
Absolutely. And I want to get to some questions from our audience here, as we always do. So this one is from Third Stage ourselves. So why is change management so hard? This is a great article that walks through those challenges. So we're sharing that. But I also want to hear from a sales standpoint, why is change management so hard? Because a lot of times, at least in our experience, we always say, even if there's no background in sales, which our marketing team has here at Third Stage, but even our technical requirements analysts say that salespeople are the hardest when it comes to change management. So why do you think that is?
I think that everyone has their own way of kind of tracking things and wanting to do things from a sales perspective. Like, I have my piece of paper that I have next to me all day, right? Which is where I have my schedule, take my notes, do whatever, which is fine for me, but it also has to then go into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where salespeople struggle, is they're very good at kind of how they operate, and they know, they don't need to log all this stuff because they're not even using the system fully, but the system is there and it helps them get reminders in ways they don't even realize. But they're focused over here and it works for them, but then getting them to buy into the system can be hard. And so I think it's just kind of a different person. It's kind of like the hunter versus nurturer mentality a little bit, honestly. And it's how we split out roles between sales and account management.
Yes.
Because it is two different mindsets. And so having them, it's not just with our CRM, it's all processes.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And all processes that the salespeople follow, it's constant reinforcement of, hey, we got to kind of follow these steps, because they're trying to move things along faster, which you don't want to discourage that either. And so you kind of have to adapt a little bit. Just being a salesperson, that's what I believe.
Yeah. Balance, right? It's all about balance. We talk a lot about how to overcome change management issues, especially in the resistance in departments or areas within the organization that can be challenging. And a lot of times what we find is purpose is really what's behind a lot of that resistance, is
Yep.
a misunderstanding of like, hey, is this going to make me sell less, this new process or this new technology? And I wanted to see from a sales leader perspective, would you say that that is a main motivator as well, is just understanding and communicating the purpose of this new process or change?
I think I agree the purpose is a huge piece of it, but also the benefit behind the purpose, like for
For
them.
sale.
And so you kind of spin things in a way that they can kind of see how, okay, if I do this, it's going to equate to this, which will help this sale go through. And so you're showing the bigger picture. And I mean, as a company, as a whole, we've gone through a ton of changes, even because over the past couple of years, we've basically like we've 3x'd. And from employees, when I started, we had 11 employees, and now we have 95 employees. And so as a company, it's a whole different culture, which the people who've been there for a while, which they have to experience a lot of that change management. New people coming in, it's very easy. It's the people who've been there, who are stuck in their ways. Like it takes a process, but it starts from the top down, and it starts with the leadership team. And if the leadership's bought in and aligned on it and all communicating on it, it'll trickle down.
Yeah, well said, definitely. So knowing that you had that homegrown kind of experience and then actually went to kind of an off-the-shelf, if you will, system, we see a lot of times that organizations that go through that have this tribal knowledge, specifically in the sales organization, right? Like they know how to do this. They've always known how to do it. However, it's never been documented. It's never been communicated or scaled. So I'm wondering, in the kind of shipping and fulfillment industry, it seems like that tribal knowledge would be really important to scale within the requirements of a system. Is that assumption correct, or can you speak to that a little bit?
For sure. And we actually just went through, because when you're growing and like we rocketed up and then it's kind of leveled off a little bit, which is great because now we can catch up to the growth, and it's a revamp of all of our SOPs, honestly, like not just within the sales team, but all departments. And when you're growing that quick, you have to just kind of go. It's hard to work on it versus in it. But now we're at a point where we can actually, we've stabilized a little bit, which is good. And it's allowing us to really focus on processes. So those processes for fulfillment, like the crazy thing is every single client is completely different. And so each client essentially has an SOP, because like you can bundle some together and we have different kind of client avatars for how we look at clients and how we ship them. But to a T, I mean, we do private label with our supplements. And so everyone's labels are different and how they want things packaged is different. And so you really have to have SOPs for each client, and it changes. So a lot of communication, we rely on a lot of different, we use Asana, like I said, but other tools to, communicate other departments, because we are very much reliant on, we are the wing to communicate with our clients and making sure things are implemented properly. And we move fast. We try to implement within a day or two.
Wow, that's really impressive, especially in a high growth, very reactive state. It sounds like it's hard to be strategic when you are kind of, just keeping your head above water at that point. It sounds like, the technology and the enablement is really an asset to be able to do that. It's just about making sure that everyone in the organization knows it's an asset as well. But we have another question here, great one, to you. So it says, Josh, what are the metrics and KPIs you incentivize to encourage user adoption across a new CRM?
Yeah, so one of the big things, and this is a lot, it's probably a little bit more on the account management side of things, honestly. But even on the sales side, we're tracking metrics based on like call login and things like that, which is very basic and whatnot. But making sure we're looking at also, like from a client onboarding perspective, if there's an issue with the onboard, like how many onboards can we bring through that don't have something happen down the road, right? And I think looking at that is very helpful. But then with our team, they're very much incentivized to make sure that our clients are coming on happy and that there's good feedback. So we're obviously getting reviews and getting feedback from all of our customers based on onboarding experience, and that factors into it a bit. But then also communication touch points is a huge one that we're tracking, and that all is being pulled. That was kind of the pivot for us, is we would track things differently. For all our KPIs now, I pull them directly from our CRM. I'm not trying to manipulate data to figure out a KPI. Right. I'm just pulling straight from the CRM, which my team knows that, and they're very aware. So if they did something, it's not going to show up or get credit on the KPI if they didn't log it.
Right. Yeah, just another kind of nudge tactic for that user adoption.
Yep.
Certainly, that makes a lot of sense. And then, I think a lot of businesses experience kind of that diversification in setting KPIs, not only as a sales organization, but across the organization. So I wondered if you could kind of speak to how technology has enabled you to set enterprise wide goals that can then trickle down to that alignment you talked about earlier.
Yeah, from a technology standpoint, I mean, we're we're doing an overhaul of all of our systems too at the same time because of where we're at as a company now. So we're bringing in new softwares from a WMS and from our shipping software. And so that's been a lot. But looking at, I guess just looking at kind of the goals and where we want to take the company, each department is operating a little bit differently from different systems. And so making sure everything we want to do is very trackable from a report side of
Yeah.
things, not trying to log things in a different way. And I think that's where we've done a good job as a company is, the owners have their vision and they have, kind of where we want to go, what spaces we want to get into, how we want to evolve. And then it's on us to kind of implement within our departments and then collaborate with the other departments. And so everyone does things a little different, which I think is good and bad within our company. But I mean, just making sure that, I guess from a KPI standpoint, making sure that everything is just able to be pulled from a very trackable source is what makes it easiest.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys have an alignment around integration points, which we always see is, really the most important part when you are using a lot of best of breed systems. So HubSpot, warehouse management, all different types of accounting, finance, those types of things. And then I just would like to tell you that I have some people that could help you with that if, ShipOffers ever need.
I've heard of a company.
Yeah, you have. Good. But in all seriousness, I think that's the biggest piece that we always help our clients to have that visibility, because that's really the first step. Is there's a huge difference between being siloed and being diversified as an organization. And it sounds like ShipOffers says throughout this, massive growth, which is super impressive, you've still stayed in as an alignment as you can in leveraging the data points that you have available. So very cool story.
It's like a double-edged sword. I mean, we're siloed, but I think our dev team in-house has done a pretty good job of making all these systems communicate. And really what they ended up doing is we kind of have our own custom brain in the middle where everything's kind of feeding into. And that's
mothership, if you will.
Exactly. There you go.
Excellent. That's very cool. Well, definitely such a great story. And ShipOffers, we did link them here, and we'll go ahead and tag them in our posts as well to check them out. But I want to shift gears a little bit, Josh, because we talked about what it's like to manage your internal systems, your sales team, your resourcing. I want to talk a little bit about your clients and helping them move to kind of that e-commerce model, optimize it, and what that has looked like for them over the last 2 years. Because I assume they've experienced some forced digital transformations.
Yeah, I mean, the whole direct response e-commerce space, which direct response is like the think like late night infomercial meets the internet, pretty much, where they're sending you to a pretty aggressive sales page to have you buy a product versus like a store online, which is more e-commerce. A lot of that's kind of merging together now too, honestly. But a lot of our clients, they're very dependent on the traffic, and I think that's where you've seen a lot of things evolve, good and bad. Like any iOS update, everyone freaks out for how that's going to impact it. Facebook impacts traffic in a huge way, and so we feel that on our end when there's issues there. But even from like a tracking standpoint, all the companies are trying to get better to be able to track their their costs per an acquisition with the client or with the customer, their lifetime value of a customer. There's so many more tools that have come out for these marketers that enable them to get really kind of honed in on what their real metrics are.
Mhm.
Because if they flutter the wrong, one way or the other, if they go down at all, they can go out of business pretty quick. And so working with them, and that's where we have a lot of partners that can help our clients with their metrics, with making sure that they know their data and what they're doing and what their
Mhm.
costs are, because they go from selling a few hundred units a month to doing 10,000 units a day.
Wow.
Very big difference, and if your numbers are off at all, you're in trouble quick.
Well, great stuff, Josh. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we are going to continue to discuss the culture of change within sales organization and the shipping industry.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I am here with Josh Noble, VP of Sales for ShipOffers, and today we're talking about sales tech, what it's like to implement a CRM and create a culture of change here within the shipping industry. So speaking of kind of that master data management in kind of that e-commerce space, I'm curious if those new privacy settings, specifically our Apple new privacy settings that we've seen in the industry, has
Yep.
impacted the ability to do that, and how have your partners, to the best of your knowledge, helped your clients overcome that?
Yeah, so that was a huge impact, and you still feel it today. I think it's iOS 14 update is what everyone talked about. But yeah, that was a big impact on a lot of our clients for how they're using that data that they're getting and sharing data. But they get creative. Marketers are pretty clever, and they're always
Yes,
kind of
we
pushing the
are.
envelope, and then all these rules come out and they change everything. But it's interesting, like a lot of the traffic has gone over to TikTok now, and like
Mhm.
different verticals, and YouTube's back and Google's doing great. Like it kind of evolves, and it's interesting to see because they're pretty good at figuring it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just for us, it's a different perspective, right? A
Yeah.
different way to massage and storytell with your data to
Yep.
understand your overall customer base. But data still is incredibly important, and it's a lot of times I think some of our more technical community doesn't understand how master data management can trickle into sales. So I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a good kind of lens into how data influences your overall sales strategies.
So our sales strategy, we're looking at, we have a pretty specific client we're looking for. So for ourselves, like, I was talking about a lot about how our customers acquired, or our clients acquire customers, but for us, it is very much, we focus a lot on partnerships and being able to track those partnerships and what they're doing and how they're growing with us is huge, and that's kind of what our data analysts, scientists, whatever, look at. I get a report every Monday, but
Yeah.
which is super helpful. But we're really looking at who can we strategically align with that can help our clients, and then in turn, we share the same type of client, and so that's where we spend a lot of our energy. And then also just taking care of our clients. I mean, providing them with the data that they need is probably the most important thing, because, and I think that's one thing that we've done a really good job of, is we have kind of our generic data we give our clients, but we do a ton of custom reporting, a ton of custom analysis that we provide to our clients, because for however they run their business, they need that data which enables them to either spend more money or tweak
Mhm.
things and spend more money on ads or tweak things if they need to.
So within that paid media support and developing those strategic relationships and partnerships, I only assume that over the last 2 years, that must have been really hard to do in a completely digital environment. Most of the strategic relationship leaders within our industry, at least, are face to face all the time.
Right.
So has that been a huge shift for you?
From finding new, like our current partners is actually pretty good. Like we did a good job of like communicating and getting on whatever Google Meet,
Mhm.
whatever. Um, a lot of gifting. But but outside of that, um, actually going and finding new partners and new business, we had to take a whole different approach to it and be more, like I said, active in the groups and whatnot. And even from a vetting perspective, it's a little bit different because a lot of our relationships come, like I said, through meeting in person, breaking bread, whatever that is.
Yeah,
Um, but it completely changed. And the nice thing is everyone went through that together
true.
in our industry. And
Good
so
point.
everyone
Yeah.
was very open to knowing that something different was needed and everyone was looking for something different. And so we did rely on a lot of different communities and a lot of different like Slack channels and things like that.
Mhm. So, very deep question because I like to really get deep sometime. What is the impact of connection in a digital environment versus a face-to-face environment? How are those different?
I mean, I my belief is I take face to face any day over
Mhm.
digital. Um, but that's just kind of how we've operated. I think you can do it very well in a digital way. But how you approach it is everything. And some people do it the right way and some people do it the wrong way. There's kind of like a natural progression that happens when you meet in person.
Uh-huh.
Online, people come off, I mean, it's crazy. Like LinkedIn, like you get all these spam, whatever, everyone tries to blow you up to sell you something. Um, and that's not how I would do it. It has to be very intentional. And the way we approach it is how can we add value? And
Mhm.
trying to add value, not even from what the services or solutions we offer, but from we're a resource of connections in the space. And if we add
Mhm.
value to you, even if you're not working with us, it'll come back. And so we got more into putting out more content, which we had never been a big content company. Um, Even our website, we did a little revamp. We're doing a much larger revamp now. But making sure we're actually putting stuff out on social, having our blogs going, having everything out there, it's kind of necessary to
Yeah.
a certain extent. And but it wasn't, which
Yeah.
is the funny thing because most of our people were kind of off the grid, and a lot of people had to kind of come back on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I also know someone that can help you with content if you're interested. And just for a little behind the curtain knowledge, Josh Noble is the very lucky husband of our global content manager and strategist, Parisa Noble. So she runs the show here, and I just get to talk to people on, our digital marketplace. So just a little look behind the curtain there in our content management strategy here at Third Stage. But definitely really interesting in the fact that you have to kind of almost create that persona, that legitimacy and authenticity within that space when it wasn't really something that was needed before because it was that human dynamic of working with one another.
Yeah,
So
it completely changed, and it's just interesting how we adapted. I mean, even from working remotely, like everything changed, and I think we've embraced it, and we didn't skip a beat. So,
well, good. I mean, I think that speaks a lot to company culture
yep,
when you're able to embrace change and innovation and new challenges. And that's one thing I really wanted to ask you about because, a lot of times that can completely derail an entire organization if you don't have a culture where change is not scary, it is embraced. So, how did your company culture set you up for success in being able to make that very significant pivot?
so we, like I said, I mean, our office side probably now has like 35, 40 employees. And we always operated very like open door policy, like open dialogue, communication and whatnot. And so, but it was a culture of you are in the office, from 8:30 to 4:30 is kind of what it was. And then pandemic happened and everyone's remote. And I'd say 95% of our team did a really good job of buying in. The people who didn't really buy into it kind of found themselves opted out. But I think the people who bought in, I think they appreciated the company, like actually like putting the employees' needs first with everything going on. And, because we were, in the fulfillment space deemed an essential business and whatnot. And, but we made sure to, anyone who didn't need to be in the office wasn't in the office.
Yeah.
So, but the buy-in, it worked out, and having that kind of already open communication style that we had where, anyone from any department would walk into my office and ask questions and whatnot. It kind of rolled over, I think, a bit online from the, different text messages, chats, whatever we had within our company. We use all the Google stuff, so all the Google chats. Everyone was very bought in on contributing within those and not keeping things to themselves.
And where did that culture of, or that open door communication policy, where does that start within an organization?
It starts with the owners. Like, they have an open door policy and they're in here every day and kind of leading by example. And like, it definitely, in my belief is everything starts from the top down. If you're not doing it, you can't expect your team to do it.
Absolutely. And so what would you say to some of our audience that are working for Fortune 200, Fortune 500 board of director based companies? How do you, as a manager, create that open door policy within your circle of influence?
I mean, like with my peers, with the other VPs in the company?
I mean, like, so within a bigger, like, corporate culture, right?
Yeah.
There's only so much you can control as a leader of your team.
Yep.
So as a team lead, how do you create that kind of practice of excellence in a feedback area when maybe you don't have owners that are right next to you, right?
For sure. I mean, in a company that big, I think you as kind of the leader of that group get to create some of the culture within it, and it may be a little bit against the grain of what the company does to a certain extent, but it should still align with the overall company's culture. But I think you have to, I mean, I'll go work out on the floor with my team for a minute. Like, I think it's just making them feel you kind of in the trenches with them is super important. And then you get that buy-in reciprocated back.
Sure. I think that ability to bond and be able to, showcase that as their leader, are experiencing their role. We talked a lot in a recent interview this week with one of our change practitioners, who's another director, one of my director peers. And she talked a lot about that ability to empathize with your overall team as a leader.
Yep.
And then when you do have a change, they trust you.
Yep.
And we talked to also the head of Lockheed Martin HR, because I talked to him about how you could not measure trust. And he taught me that you actually can, and it's the attrition of the employee.
Yep.
So I totally understand what you're saying. And I think that is a great method and approach to create that overall loyalty.
Well, and you have to speak to everyone different too. Like, everyone has their own kind of how they like to be led and managed. And so you kind of have to adapt. It's like, I think there's probably two thoughts of like, one, people are going to buy into your management strategy, or two, you have your management strategy, which is to kind of help different personality types and different types of people. Because my sales operations person is very much different than my salesperson, which sales ops does all the implementation. And then versus like more of a sales coordinator admin, like you have different kind of personalities on the sales team, and you kind of have to speak to them a little bit different and even dangle the carrot that gets them excited a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. And we experienced that same type of dynamic on the client services side. The reason we are a boutique digital transformation and independent and technology agnostic agency is because we match our team to the style of our client. So totally understand that. So in our last couple minutes here, Josh, I want to ask you kind of the future state of shipping and fulfillment. Again, nobody has a crystal ball, but when it comes to, will this kind of unrest, do you feel like it will normalize at some point? And then also to add on to that, from a strategic relationship building, do you feel like we'll continue to be kind of in this hybrid gray space, or do you feel like that industry specifically, which you're an expert in, will move back to that in-person overall integration?
Right. So from a shipping fulfillment standpoint, like logistically, drones, no, basically, I think over the next couple of years, things will normalize a bit. But right now, I mean, it's Murphy's Law of everything that's happened, right?
Mhm.
From the pandemic, from everything going on right now, like you have so much inflation, like it's all kind of tied together too.
Mhm.
But yeah, eventually it has to normalize a little bit. Costs have gone up. I don't know if they'll go back down, but hopefully they stop going up.
Certainly.
And so, but I think everyone's kind of going through it a bit together. And so, yeah, I mean, talking with our manufacturer suppliers and even FedEx, UPS, I think intentionally laid off people by going back to lowering their basically entry level wage that they did during the pandemic. I think things are, from like domestically, are starting to level off, but I think international is going to take some time, especially from a supply chain standpoint.
Mhm.
And then your other question had to do with from a how we get business sales standpoint.
Yeah. How do you get there?
With that, I think it's going to be a hybrid.
Yeah.
Even now, like we've been doing events or back traveling and stuff quite a bit this year. We have more conferences, events than ever. And with that, the Facebook groups are more active than ever too. So
Wow.
I think it's creating more connection, and people are keeping that connection going outside of the event, is what we're seeing. And so it's actually become pretty good. And we have some people on our team, fortunately, who are very active on social media and do a really good job of interacting. And that's probably the hard part, because it adds another like 5 communication channels that you need to have. So we kind of section it out though. Like this group, I have this person who's kind of focused on that. This group, this person's focused on that, because it's overwhelming. Like,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
for sales and biz dev.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like you said, your approach of kind of matching the overall, approach of your employees. If you do have a digital based or digital native that's more comfortable in that area, then you're able to leverage that as opposed to the in-person person. So having that really diversification of talent, I'm sure must be a huge asset.
Yeah, and I think you kind of figure that out too. Like we hire for culture versus based on like skill.
Mm-hmm.
And so, skill set can be taught to a certain extent. I mean, sales, you got to be somewhat outgoing, but culture is huge. And so being able to kind of work with people and figure out where they actually like to operate, it's been a blessing for sure, because it's kind of naturally progressed the way we wanted it to, with some people being very good. Our remote employees, honestly, all of them do a really good job of getting into those social groups because they kind of have to. And our in-office sales team do a really good job of interacting between departments. So they kind of support each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, speaking of in-person travel, I heard you were in Mexico or somewhere else. Well, my husband, who works for Third Stage, as you all know, was in Aruba. So, Paris and I were holding down the front.
Yeah, the travel thing is fun. I have a team now, though, so I don't have to go everywhere.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for your time. So if our audience wants to engage with ShipOffers or learn more about you, what are some opportunities for them to do so?
Yeah, I mean, our website, ShipOffers.com, super easy. You can go on there and if you can fill out a form on there and get in touch, or even email me, which is josh@ShipOffers.com. Yeah, feel free to reach out. Happy to answer any questions. And I know this is probably a little different interview than you guys usually do on the show, but I think it kind of sheds a good light on the sales side of it.
Yeah, and for us, we've been working on our human-to-human content development, and I think that's a huge part of why we like to have this diversification of conversation. For example, we had an emotional intelligence expert, which is way out of our wheelhouse in the technical space, but what we've learned is if you don't leverage the human component, the technology component will never be successful. And I think a lot of that can be stemmed from sales. I think, in my perspective, organizational change management is sales strategy. It truly is. It's just you're selling to your internal employees as opposed to external or B2B customers.
I mean, everyone's selling. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's a salesperson, even if they're not a salesperson, is kind of the reality. Like, our purchasing team, like, the biggest thing that they had to learn was we're a buyer in this situation, but the relationship makes buying a lot easier.
Yeah, and that relationship development is really the core to making technology implementation successful. Because like we talked about, that trust internally and then externally too, if you are servicing a platform, an e-commerce, integration, application management, cloud management, cloud hosting, all of those different things, your client or your partner has to trust you, or that technology is never going to establish the highest business value and reach that ROI objective as it should. So
Yep. I agree. They go hand in hand. And that's where, we are good at relationships, and now it's focusing on the tech side of things. And I think as we've brought that up, it's made us not losing the relationship side. That's been kind of the main, honestly, a huge conversation is just because our tech is doing more heavy lifting, it doesn't mean you can lose the relationship aspect of it. And so having those hand in hand is why we've been experiencing the growth we've had, honestly.
Well, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much for the insight, and congratulations on all this, incredible growth for you and the ShipOffer team. And hopefully we can have you back, or have someone in your kind of wheelhouse back to maybe speak about the technical stuff of supply chain that we always.
Yeah, don't talk to a salesperson about tech. I pretend like I know tech, but yeah, we have our developer's been with us for over 20 years, and our senior developer, and we have some good dev guys. You guys can have a fun conversation with that.
Good.
All right, good stuff. Thanks, Kyler and Josh. That's a good conversation, talking about sales technology in the shipping industry, culture of change, all that good stuff. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Kyler and I will hit on some of the key points and takeaways from that conversation. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays, or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 67. Thanks for being here today. And we just had Josh Noble on the show. Kyler, you had a chance to interview him for our sister podcast. What were some of your takeaways from that conversation with Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk to Josh for a variety of reasons, not only because he does run a sales organization, but within the shipping industry specifically, as that has kind of been flipped on its head in the last couple of years due to the post COVID-19 pandemic. So I thought that was really interesting to be able to talk through some of those changes. And I'm interested in your feedback, Eric, on the evolution of selecting a CRM or building out a CRM. Because as a sales tool, I can imagine that would be maybe a little bit more difficult than other best of breed systems, just because of the less technical skill set. A lot of times that maybe the project team internally has. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain to us the difference in CRMs and maybe some nuances behind what that means to have technology supporting a sales organization.
Yeah, so CRM can do a lot of different things. I mean, I think the more obvious or the more common use of CRM is to manage a pipeline. So
Hmm.
managing an incoming lead or opportunity, the qualification, the notes, the proposals, all the stuff that go along with a sales pursuit. But in addition to that, some of the more robust CRM systems can do a lot of other things too, as far as managing territories,
Hmm.
managing sales hierarchies, managing sales commissions and quotas and that sort of thing. Um, which, by the way, sales commissions, for example, would have to tie back to your order management system as well as
Hmm.
to your payroll system, because you have to pay the commissions to sales reps. So there's a lot of additional things that CRM systems can do other than just basic pipeline management. But that's a few things that CRM systems generally do. And the other thing to note is that you have ERP enterprise technologies that might have a CRM module within their overall offering, or you could look at a standalone CRM system like a Salesforce, for example, or Pipedrive, or one of those types of standalone best of breed solutions.
Absolutely. And since CRMs are so vast, obviously you can pick a lot. And what I think was interesting when it comes to implementing a CRM and focusing on that user adoption, which we know within a sales organization can be a big pain point. A lot of times, salespeople, they just want to sell and they're not there to sit behind a desk and put in different data points and those types of things. So I thought it was interesting how Josh mentioned just the roll up of the KPIs, because that is an established behavior. Usually, if you are in sales, you are used to hitting some sort of KPIs or understanding your impact on KPIs. So, kind of folding the user adoption in there was something that they found was a successful tactic. So, basically, if you're not utilizing the system, you don't achieve the same bonus commission that you would just on a baseline of sales numbers.
Yeah, hold on. I need to make a note of that for our sales team here internally at third stage, because we have the same exact problem. Even despite despite the consulting we do for our clients, we need to take a dose of our own medicine at times and increase adoption. But no, it's a good point and a true one. I like what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying about how when you have to create that incentive, because when
Mhm.
you're a sales rep, it's all about my commission, and
Mhm.
sales reps generally make more in commission than or variable pay than most people. So they have a lot at stake. Every minute they're not spending selling can be perceived as a negative or something that's taking away from their income generating abilities. So you end up having to not only create incentives for people to adapt or adopt and use the CRM system, but also just sell it to them.
Mhm.
What is it that why is it that we need to centralize this customer information? How does it help them? How does it help the organization, the overall team, that sort of thing? And usually there's a clear benefit to it, but if all you do is look at what's in it for me and what I see in front of me, it's not always clear to everyone why they should be doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely like how we kind of talked about the need for leadership alignment and really setting that example. Especially in a sales organization, I feel like there's a huge culture of competition and almost like camaraderie, right? That comes with that type of high achievers in a sales organization. So I think a lot of times getting that buy-in and leading by example on the leadership level really sets the expectation for the rest of the organization.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if you can get your sales team to adapt to new technology, the good news is that you're not that it'll be easy, but it might be easier to get other people or others within the organization to adapt.
Absolutely. And I think he talked about listening to his organization and the need for some outside support staff when it comes to like business operation managers and things like that that help kind of on the data side that can really split that sales data, digest it, and be able to support on that piece of it. And so that you still need to be inputting those CRM data points, right, or that customer information, but there's someone on the back end that is a bit more of an analyst role that can help you understand them and make sure that you're actually utilizing that data in an actionable way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And the last part I think I'll touch on is, he talked about managing remote cultures and what that looks like for a sales team. And for me, in my background in sales, which was way pandemic, it's just such a big part of that is those big sales rallies, those all team meetings, those times where you really get these highly motivated employees really, really kind of hyped up to do a great job for the quarter to come, the year to come. So I was really curious on how they did that in a virtual environment. And the funny part about that is he said, and the strategic partnerships too, I should mention, is he said they don't.
Yeah,
So like and I think that that is just so honest in the fact that we can't do everything in a remote environment for some specific organizations. We've learned in the last 2 years we can do a lot, but when it comes to that connection and establishing that that overall just relationship with the brand and the leadership and your peer network, it really does need to be somewhat in person as much as you possibly can. Maybe not every day, but there does have to be a connection within whether you're creating a partnership relationship or trying to create, some affinity within your department as well. And I think the more they trust and create that strong relationship with the leadership team, the more user adoption becomes less of an issue because they truly do trust what's going on within the business.
yeah, it's a good point. You can't beat just because we had a pandemic and we got used to and comfortable with Zoom doesn't mean we can change human physiology overnight. Hundreds or
Exactly.
thousands of years of human behavior isn't going to change in 2 years. So totally agree with that. That trust and that in-person interaction and collaboration is key, especially to sales people and a relationship-based field like sales.
Absolutely. But great conversation. Josh did great on the first time of our live stream podcast. Just a reminder, I do live streams every Thursday. Sometimes they jump around a little bit, but on our YouTube channel, you can go ahead and set a reminder that will be up there. And we love to hear and engage from our audience within those different opportunities as well.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, this is good to have him on the show and appreciate Josh being on the show. And we appreciate you facilitating that conversation and being part of this show as always, Kyler. And thank you to the audience for the great interaction and for listening and supporting this show. If you don't mind, just be sure to share this podcast with colleagues and peers that you think might be interested in this content. We'd love to get the word out and get as many people as possible listening to the show. So thank you, everyone, for this week's podcast. We're going to see you again next week. We'll have a new episode every Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms. So be sure to subscribe, comment, and check us out there. So hope you all have a great week in the meantime, and we will see you next time on Transformation Ground Control.